Lightning split the sky above Silver Ridge Mountain, illuminating the forest in harsh, fleeting bursts. Rain hammered against the wooden cabin nestled among ancient pines, but it was no match for the orange flames now devouring the structure from within. Smoke billowed into the night, defying the downpour. Inside, Nathaniel Everett's lungs burned as he navigated through the inferno. His tall frame ducked beneath a collapsing beam, his eyes watering from the acrid smoke. He wasn't searching for possessions or valuables. Only one thing mattered. There on the corner desk, partially engulfed in flames, lay a worn leather journal. "Come on," he muttered, lunging forward. The heat seared his skin as he snatched the journal, clutching it to his chest like a mother would a child. A thunderous crack announced the roof's imminent collapse. Nathaniel turned and sprinted for the door, bursting outside into the rain just as the cabin's structure gave way behind him. He fell to his knees in the mud, gasping for clean air, the journal still protected against his chest. Through the curtain of rain, dark figures emerged, townspeople from Willowbrook with torches and grim expressions, undeterred by the storm. Their faces, illuminated by firelight, showed not concern but accusation. "I told you all," a booming voice rose above the storm. Judge Wallace stepped forward, his silver hair plastered to his skull, pointing a finger at Nathaniel. "He's a witch. Look how he saves his book of spells while good people suffer." Nathaniel's blue eyes, deep set in his weathered face, searched the crowd until they found her. Eleanor Montgomery, standing apart from the mob, her expression torn between horror and desperation. Their eyes locked across the distance, a silent communication passing between them. The sheriff stepped forward, hand resting on his holster. "Dr. Everett, you need to come with me." Nathaniel clutched the journal tighter, rain streaming down his bearded face. How had it come to this? 3 months ago, he had been safely hidden in his solitude, wounds buried deep, the world and its cruelties kept at bay. 3 months early, dawn broke over Silver Ridge, bathing the mountainside in golden light. Nathaniel Everett sat on his cabin porch, strong hands methodically grinding herbs in a stone mortar. At 45, his once handsome face had been weathered by grief and solitude. His chestnut hair and beard, now streaked with gray, framed deep blue eyes that had seen too much suffering. 10 years of isolation had honed his senses. He paused in his work, head tilting slightly. Something moved in the underbrush, not the familiar pattern of deer or fox. Nathaniel set down the mortar and reached for his rifle, more from habit than intention. A low whine emanated from the bushes. Nathaniel approached cautiously, rifle lowered. Parting the foliage revealed a gray wolf, not fully grown, its leg caught in a steel trap. The animal growled weakly at eyes reflecting fear and pain. "Easy now," Nathaniel murmured, setting his rifle aside. "I won't hurt you." The wolf snapped at him, but there was little strength behind it. Blood matted its fur where the trap's teeth bit into flesh. Nathaniel recognized the trap's design, illegal on these mountains set by poachers from the valley. With practiced movements, he removed his belt and fashioned a makeshift muzzle. The wolf struggled briefly as Nathaniel secured it, then went still, as if sensing his intentions weren't malicious. It took all his strength to pry open the trap's jaws, wincing at the damage they had inflicted. "You'll need more than wilderness medicine," he told the wolf, gently lifting the animal. It was lighter than it should be, starving as well as injured. Inside his cabin, Nathaniel worked with the precision of his former profession. He cleaned the wound, applied a poultice of yarrow and comfrey, and set about stitching the worst lacerations. The wolf remained surprisingly docile, watching him with intelligent eyes. "You're lucky," Nathaniel said, voice rough from disuse. "Trap missed the bone. You'll walk again if infection doesn't set in." As if understanding, the wolf lowered its head onto its paws with a sigh. Nathaniel glanced at the worn leather journal on his desk, his life's work a combination of formal medical training and wilderness remedies. "I haven't practiced on anything bigger than a rabbit in years," he admitted to the wolf. "Let's hope I haven't lost my touch." Tom. Down in Willowbrook, Eleanor Montgomery measured dried valerian root with careful precision. At 38, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her movements economical and purposeful. Her chestnut hair, swept back from her face, was prematurely streaked with silver, a testament to grief's marking. Intelligent brown eyes missed nothing as she worked in her apothecary shop. The bell above the door jingled. Eleanor looked up to see 8-year-old Emily Watson enter, clutching a piece of paper. "Miss Nora," the child said, using the nickname the town had given Eleanor. "Ma sent me for her tonic." Eleanor smiled, the expression warming her reserved features. Of course, Emily. How is your mother feeling? The cough's no better, Emily replied, her small face serious. But she says your medicine helps her sleep. Eleanor nodded, turning to her shelves of bottles and tinctures. Emily was one of many children in Willowbrook being raised by a single parent. The girl's father had been lost in a mining accident 2 years prior, a common fate in these parts. As Eleanor prepared the tonic, her mind wandered to her own losses. Her husband James and son William, taken by yellow fever 5 years ago. The epidemic had swept through Willowbrook with devastating efficiency, claiming 27 souls in a town of barely 300. Since then, Eleanor had transformed her husband's small apothecary into something more. She studied medical texts ordered from back east, corresponded with herbalists and medicine women from surrounding territories, and experimented with remedies both traditional and novel. Miss Nora, Emily's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Are you making magic? Eleanor smiled again, handing the girl the carefully labeled bottle. Not magic, Emily. Just science we don't fully understand yet. After Emily left, Eleanor locked the shop's front door and retreated to her back room. Here, away from customers' eyes, she kept her true work journals filled with observations, experiments, and theories. Botanical drawings hung on walls beside anatomical charts. A small microscope ordered at great expense from Chicago sat on a desk cluttered with specimens and notes. Eleanor opened a drawer and removed a weathered letter that had arrived the previous day. It described outbreaks of a fever in neighboring settlements Copper Creek and Miners Rest. The symptoms resembled yellow fever but progressed more rapidly. Dr. Martin, her correspondent in Copper Creek, reported 7 deaths already. She folded the letter, a familiar knot of dread tightening in her stomach. 5 years had passed since the last epidemic, but the memory remained raw. James delirious with fever. William's small body burning hot, then turning cold, graves being dug faster than prayers could be said over them. Eleanor moved to her bookshelf, fingers tracing spines until they found a particular journal, not her own writing, but notes she had transcribed from memory and fragments. Notes from her time in Boston when she had trained as a nurse under Catherine Everett, wife of the brilliant but controversial Dr. Nathaniel Everett. The connection was Willowbrook's best-kept secret. Few knew that before settling here, Eleanor had trained in Boston's most prestigious hospital, or that he had assisted the Everetts in their groundbreaking research on infectious diseases. Fewer still knew that the mysterious mountain man living in solitude on Silver Ridge was the same Dr. Everett whose reputation had been destroyed after his experimental treatments failed to save his family. Eleanor had recognized him the first time he came to town 3 years ago, though he was much changed. She had kept his secret, watching from afar as he purchased minimal supplies and disappeared back to his mountain. She'd never approached him, never revealed that she knew who he truly was, the man whose theories might have saved her own family had the medical establishment not condemned them. But now, with another epidemic threatening, Eleanor faced a choice: continue her solitary research with limited resources, or seek out the one man whose knowledge might make the difference between life and death for Willowbrook. The mountain was dangerous, Nathaniel Everett was unpredictable, but the alternative, watching helplessly as disease claimed more lives, was unthinkable. Eleanor closed the journal, decision made. Tomorrow she would climb Silver Ridge. Dr. Harold Wells rubbed his tired eyes as he finished examining 6-year-old Timothy Collins. The boy's symptoms were mild, slight, fever, fatigue, loss of appetite, but Harold had seen enough epidemics in his 65 years to recognize the harbingers of something worse. Plenty of fluids and rest, he told the boy's anxious mother. Come back immediately if his fever rises or if a rash develops. After they left, Harold slumped into his chair, the weight of knowledge heavy on his shoulders. Reports from neighboring towns were grim. Whatever this disease was, it moved quickly and killed efficiently. Conventional treatments seemed ineffective. A knock at his door preceded Sheriff Thomas Reed's entrance. At 50, the sheriff was still robust, though his dark hair had receded and his mustache gone gray. Any more cases, Doc? Reed asked, removing his hat. 3 today, all children, all mild so far. Harold reached for his pipe. It's coming, Thomas. Same pattern as 67. The sheriff nodded grimly. Judge Wallace wants to know if we should restrict travel. It wouldn't hurt, though it may be too late. Harold struck a match. The real question is whether we're prepared for what's coming. Reed shifted uncomfortably. Wallace thinks we should consult that fellow up on the ridge, the one they call the mountain doctor. Harold's pipe remained unlit, the match burning down to his fingers. He extinguished it with a sharp gesture. Absolutely not. That man is no doctor. He's a hermit, possibly deranged. Eleanor Montgomery speaks highly of his knowledge of herbs and such. Mrs. Montgomery is a shopkeeper with delusions of medical expertise. Harold snapped immediately, regretting his tone. Eleanor was well respected, her remedies often effective where his own treatments failed. Still, his pride wouldn't allow him to acknowledge it. We'll handle this through proven medical practice, not wilderness folklore. And what Harold couldn't bring himself to say was that he knew exactly who lived on that mountain. Dr. Nathaniel Everett had been a rising star in Boston medicine before his fall from grace, a fall Harold had contributed to by signing the petition to revoke Everett's medical license. Not out of malice, but out of genuine belief that Everett's experimental methods endangered patients. The fact that Harold now secretly referenced Everett's research papers hidden in his desk drawer was an irony not lost on him. Just passing along the judge's thoughts, Reed said, replacing his hat. I'll tell him you have matters in hand. After the sheriff left, Harold unlocked his drawer and removed a medical journal published 8 years ago. In it, Dr. Nathaniel Everett had proposed novel treatments for yellow fever treatments, combining traditional medicine with botanical compounds that the medical establishment had dismissed as quackery. Treatments that, in retrospect, had shown promising results before Everett's experiments were shut down. Harold closed the journal with a sigh. Pride and fear had guided his actions then. He wondered if they were still guiding him now as another epidemic loomed. The wolf, whom Nathaniel had begun calling Lobo, showed remarkable recovery over the following week. The animal remained wary but seemed to understand Nathaniel meant no harm. It accepted food and water, tolerated examination of its healing leg, and watched Nathaniel's daily routines with intelligent curiosity. You'll be running free soon enough, Nathaniel told Lobo as he changed the poultice on its leg, though you might want to find a new territory. The men who set that trap will likely return. Lobo's ears pricked up suddenly. A moment later, Nathaniel heard it too. Footsteps approaching his cabin. Human footsteps, deliberate but cautious. Nathaniel hadn't had a visitor in months. The townspeople generally avoided his mountain, spreading stories about the dangerous hermit who spoke to animals and brewed strange potions. These rumors suited him fine, they kept people away. He moved to the window, body tense. Through the glass, he saw a woman picking her way along the narrow path to his cabin. Her clothing was practical, but distinctly feminine, a dark blue skirt and jacket. Sturdy boots, hair pinned beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Nathaniel recognized her immediately as the apothecary from Willowbrook. He'd seen her during his infrequent trips to town, though they'd never spoken. Something about her had always seemed vaguely familiar, though he attributed this to her resemblance to other educated women he'd known in his previous life. Lobo growled softly from his corner. I agree, Nathaniel muttered. Nothing good comes from the valley. He considered remaining silent, pretending absence until she gave up and left. But dark clouds were gathering above the mountain, promising an early autumn storm. His conscience wouldn't allow him to leave anyone, even an unwelcome visitor, stranded in such weather. Nathaniel opened the door before she could knock, startling her mid-step. You're trespassing, he said bluntly. Eleanor Montgomery's composed expression barely flickered at his rudeness. Mr. Everett, I presume. I apologize for the intrusion, but I need to speak with you on an urgent matter. I don't receive visitors. He made no move to invite her inside, even as the first raindrops began to fall. I wouldn't have come if it weren't important. Her voice was level, educated Eastern, not Western. There's illness in the valley. People may die without your expertise. Nathaniel's face hardened. I'm not a doctor. We both know that isn't true. Something flashed in her eyes, knowledge, certainty. Thunder rumbled overhead, closer now. The rain intensified, but Nathaniel remained unmoved, studying her with narrowed eyes. Who are you, Eleanor Montgomery? I run the apothecary in Willowbrook. That's not what I asked. Before she could respond, lightning cracked nearby, followed immediately by thunderous percussion. The storm had arrived in earnest. With reluctance born of common decency rather than hospitality, Nathaniel stepped aside. Come in until the storm passes. Then you'll leave. Eleanor entered, removing her now soaked hat. Inside, she paused at the sight of Lobo, who had risen on 3 legs, hackles raised. You have a wolf, she observed with remarkable composure. He has me, Nathaniel corrected, closing the door against the downpour. Sit if you want. The storm won't pass quickly. Eleanor chose a straight-backed chair near the fire while Nathaniel remained standing, arms crossed. The cabin's single room suddenly felt too small for the tension between them. Now, Nathaniel said after silence had stretched uncomfortably, hawing, explain how you know who I am. Eleanor met his gaze directly. I trained as a nurse at Massachusetts General in Boston. I assisted your wife, Dr. Catherine Everett, during her research on infectious diseases. The words hit Nathaniel like physical blows. Catherine's name spoken aloud after so many years of silence. The connection to Boston, to his past life. The realization that this woman knew exactly who and what he was. You worked with Catherine. His voice had lost its edge, replaced by something raw. Eleanor nodded. For 2 years. I was young, just starting my training. She was brilliant, compassionate, a natural teacher. Nathaniel turned away, moving to the window to hide the emotion that threatened to overcome his carefully constructed defenses. Outside, rain lashed the glass, a physical manifestation of the storm within him. Why are you here, Mrs. Montgomery? He asked, his back still turned. There's sickness in Copper Creek and Miner's Rest. Fever similar to Yellowjack but faster acting. It's only a matter of time before it reaches Willowbrook. She paused. I need the flowering herb that grows on the north face of this mountain. Alpine feverfew. And I hoped you might share your knowledge of treating such illnesses. Nathaniel gave a bitter laugh. My knowledge failed to save my wife and children. It destroyed my reputation and career. He turned back to face her. If you know who I am, you know what happened in Boston. I know what they claimed happened, Eleanor countered. I also know your research was showing promise before they shut it down. Catherine believed in your methods, even when the medical board didn't. The mention of Catherine's faith in him was another blow. Nathaniel moved to his desk, fingers brushing the leather journal that contained their combined research. There's a child in town, Eleanor continued softly. Emily Watson, 8 years old. Reminds me of your daughter, Elizabeth. Don't. The word was a warning sharp as a blade. I lost my husband and son to yellow fever 5 years ago. Eleanor pressed on. I've spent every day since trying to ensure it doesn't happen again. If this new sickness is what I fear, conventional medicine won't save them. Lobo had settled back in his corner, watching them both with attentive eyes. The wolf's presence seemed to ground Nathaniel, giving him a focus beyond the painful memories Eleanor's words evoked. The herb you're seeking doesn't grow on the north face, he finally said. It's on the eastern slope near the waterfall. But it won't help alone. Its properties need to be activated through specific preparation. Eleanor's expression brightened with hope. Will you show me? Before Nathaniel could respond, a violent gust of wind slammed against the cabin, rattling the windows. The storm was intensifying. You can't travel in this weather, he conceded. We'll discuss the herb tomorrow after the storm passes. Thank you, Eleanor said simply. Nathaniel gestured to a small cot in the corner. You can rest there. I'll tend the fire. As Eleanor settled on the cot, Nathaniel added wood to the fireplace, mind churning with unwelcome memories and emotions. After ensuring Lobo was comfortable, he took his journal and moved to the desk, turning his back to his unwanted guest. He opened the leather-bound book, fingers tracing Catherine's elegant handwriting, interspersed with his own rougher notes. Their shared research, their hope for advancing medicine beyond its rigid constraints. The work that had cost them everything. Behind him, he heard Eleanor's breathing deepen as exhaustion claimed her. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountain, and within Nathaniel, long-buried feelings stirred like hibernating creatures, sensing an unseasonable warmth. Eleanor woke to the aroma of coffee and the soft sounds of movement. Opening her eyes, she saw Nathaniel at his small stove, his back to her. Lobo watched her from his corner, yellow eyes unblinking. Good morning, she said, sitting up. Nathaniel turned slightly, acknowledging her with a nod. Storm's past. We can look for your herb after you've eaten. The mountain air had cleared with the storm's passage, revealing a crystalline autumn day. Sunlight filtered through pine branches as Nathaniel led Eleanor along a narrow trail. He moved with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with the terrain, occasionally pausing to point out medicinal plants. Yarrow, he indicated a plant with feathery leaves and tiny white flowers. Good for wounds, reduces fever. You probably know it. I use it in several remedies, Eleanor confirmed, though I've had trouble cultivating it in my garden. It prefers poor soil and full sun. Your valley's too rich and shaded. They continued in silence until reaching a small waterfall cascading over moss-covered rocks. In the spray-dampened soil nearby grew clusters of small white flowers with distinctive serrated leaves. Alpine feverfew, Nathaniel said, kneeling beside the plants. Similar to common feverfew, but more potent. The difference is in the stem structure and the pattern of the leaves. Eleanor knelt beside him, studying the plant with keen interest. How is it prepared? The flowers and leaves are used dried, then ground to powder, but its efficacy depends on when it's harvested and how it's combined with other elements. Nathaniel glanced at her. It's not a simple remedy. I didn't expect it would be. Eleanor met his gaze. Will you teach me? Nathaniel's expression remained guarded, but something in his eyes had softened since the previous night. I'll show you the preparation. The rest is your responsibility. They gathered the herbs in silence, filling Eleanor's canvas bag. As they worked, Nathaniel occasionally stole glances at her. There was competence in her movements, precision in the way she selected only the healthiest specimens. She worked like someone trained in medicine, not merely herb gathering. You said you were a nurse, he said finally. Why are you running an apothecary in a mining town? Eleanor continued her careful harvesting. After Boston, I married and moved west with my husband. James was a surveyor for the railroad. When he finished his contract, we decided to settle in Willowbrook rather than return east. He purchased the apothecary and I helped run it. And now, after James and William died, I continued alone. The town needed the medicines and I needed purpose. Nathaniel understood that need all too well. Purpose was what kept a person moving forward after loss, whether that purpose was healing others or hiding from the world as he had chosen to do. Back at the cabin, Nathaniel cleared his desk and laid out the harvested plants. Eleanor watched as he separated flowers from stems, explaining the properties of each part. His hands, large and weathered, moved with surprising delicacy. The preparation requires precise timing, he explained. Dry the flowers too quickly, they lose potency. Too slowly, they develop mold that can be toxic. Eleanor absorbed every detail, occasionally asking questions that revealed her substantial knowledge. As the afternoon progressed, Nathaniel found himself sharing more than he had intended. Techniques he had developed, observations from his research. While the first batch of herbs dried by the fire, Nathaniel reluctantly agreed to Eleanor's request to examine his medical journals. He watched tensely as she handled the worn leather book that contained his life's work. This combination of willow bark and feverfew, she said, pointing to a particular entry. Catherine mentioned this in her lectures. She believed the compounds worked synergistically. We were testing the theory when Nathaniel trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. Eleanor nodded in understanding. When the epidemic hit Boston? When I failed, he corrected harshly. Did you buy? Eleanor looked up from the journal. Or did they prevent you from implementing your full protocol? Catherine told me the hospital administration refused to authorize your complete treatment regimen. Nathaniel stared at her, a long-buried memory surfacing. The hospital board meeting, his pleas falling on deaf ears, being told his methods were too experimental, too risky. By the time the conventional treatments had proven ineffective, it was too late for many patients, including his own family. You seem to know a great deal about what happened, he said, voice tight with suspicion. Catherine shared her frustrations with her students. She believed in your work even when others didn't. Eleanor hesitated. After she fell ill, she asked me to preserve her notes. I memorized what I could before they cleared her office. This revelation struck Nathaniel deeply. The idea that Catherine, even in her final days, had tried to protect their research and that this woman had helped her shifted something within him. Before he could respond, Lobo suddenly growled, rising on his three good legs. A moment later, Nathaniel heard what had alerted the wolf approaching horses. Moving to the window, he saw two riders making their way up the trail, Sheriff Reed and another man he didn't recognize. Visitors from town, he said, expression darkening. Stay inside. Nathaniel stepped onto the porch as the riders approached, positioning himself to block the doorway. Sheriff Reed raised a hand in greeting, but his expression was serious. Dr. Everett, the sheriff called, using the title Nathaniel had abandoned years ago. Need to have a word with you. I'm not a doctor anymore, Sheriff, and I don't welcome uninvited guests. Reed dismounted, followed by his companion, a man in his 30s with the unmistakable look of a telegraph operator. "This is Morris from the Western Union office. He's got news you should hear." Nathaniel remained impassive. "Whatever it is, it doesn't concern me." "It's about that sickness in Copper Creek," Morris said. "Telegraph came through this morning. It's spreading fast, 32 cases now, 14 dead, mostly children." Despite his resolve to remain uninvolved, Nathaniel felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the physician's instinct to help to heal. He fought it down. "Why tell me Dr. Wells is the town physician?" "Judge Wallace thought you might have insights," Reed said carefully, "given your experience with similar outbreaks." So they knew who he was. Nathaniel wasn't entirely surprised. Secrets rarely remain buried forever in small communities. "I have nothing to offer. Now, if you'll excuse me." The cabin door opened behind him and Eleanor stepped out. "Sheriff Reed, Mr. Morris, has there been news of the fever reaching Willowbrook?" Reed looked startled to find Eleanor there. "Mrs. Montgomery, what are you doing up here?" "Collecting herbs for the apothecary," she answered smoothly. "Mr. Everett knows the mountain's flora better than anyone." Nathaniel shot her a warning glance, which she ignored. "No cases in Willowbrook yet," Reed replied, "but Miners Rest has reported their first deaths. Dr. Wells is concerned it's only a matter of time." "Then we should prepare," Eleanor said with quiet authority. "Mr. Everett has been kind enough to assist me in gathering medicinal plants that may help manage symptoms." Morris looked between Eleanor and Nathaniel with undisguised curiosity. "The judge will want to know if you're willing to consult Dr. Everett, given the circumstances." "I've told Mrs. Montgomery what I know about the local herbs," Nathaniel said stiffly. "That's the extent of my involvement." Reed nodded, though disappointment was clear in his expression. "We'll let the judge know. Mrs. Montgomery, would you like an escort back to town?" "Thank you, but I have more work to do here," she replied. "I'll return before nightfall." After the men departed, Nathaniel turned to Eleanor with barely contained anger. "You had no right to involve me in town matters." "I didn't involve you," she countered calmly. "They came looking for your help independently. That should tell you something." "It tells me they're desperate enough to seek help from the man they've spent years calling a madman and a hermit. Perhaps they're finally recognizing the value of your knowledge." Nathaniel gave a bitter laugh. "People only value what they previously scorned when fear drives them to it. Once the crisis passes, they'll return to their comfortable prejudices." Eleanor studied him for a long moment. "Is that why you hide up here? Because you believe people are incapable of change?" "I'm here because I've seen what happens when you challenge established thinking. The medical community destroyed my reputation, my work." "They couldn't destroy your knowledge," Eleanor interrupted, "or your ability to help others. Only you could surrender those." Her words struck like a physical blow. Nathaniel turned away, unwilling to let her see how deeply they affected him. "The herbs should be ready for the next stage," he said, changing the subject. "If you're staying, make yourself useful." Inside, they returned to the work of preparing the feverfew. The tension between them remained but gradually dissipated as they focused on the task at hand. By late afternoon, they had produced a small quantity of the medicinal powder carefully stored in a glass vial. "This isn't enough for an epidemic," Nathaniel observed, "and it's only one component of an effective treatment." Eleanor nodded. "I'll need to return with larger baskets, perhaps assistants, to help gather more. The location of these plants isn't common knowledge. I prefer it stays that way." "Of course." Eleanor hesitated. "Would you consider coming to town yourself? Your expertise would be invaluable, especially if the sickness spreads." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I haven't set foot in a sick room in 10 years. Perhaps it's time." He turned away, unwilling to engage with the challenge in her words. "You should head back before dark. The trail is treacherous in the twilight." Eleanor recognized the dismissal but made one final attempt. "The journal your research with Catherine. Would you allow me to study it more thoroughly? There may be elements we could implement immediately." Nathaniel hesitated, torn between protecting his past and the possibility that his work might actually help. Finally, he moved to the desk and picked up the journal. "Take it," he said gruffly, "but treat it with care. It's all I have left of—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I understand," Eleanor said softly, accepting the journal with reverent hands. I'll return it soon. As she gathered her things to leave, Lobo limped to Nathaniel's side, watching Eleanor with intelligent eyes. Your wolf is healing well, she observed. You have a gift. He's not my wolf. Once he's strong enough, he'll return to the wild where he belongs. Eleanor smiled slightly. Some creatures choose to stay even when they're free to leave. Good night, Mr. Everett. Thank you for your help. After she departed, Nathaniel stood in the doorway of his cabin, watching until she disappeared among the trees. Beside him, Lobo whined softly. I know, Nathaniel murmured. She's trouble. But even as he said it, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a reluctant spark of connection to the world beyond his mountain. Eleanor reached Willowbrook as twilight descended, the leather journal safely tucked in her bag, alongside the precious vial of medicine. The town seemed unnaturally quiet, the usual evening activities subdued. Outside the small church, a group of men gathered in serious conversation. As she approached her apothecary, Dr. Wells emerged from his office across the street, looking haggard. He spotted her and hurried over. Mrs. Montgomery, where have you been? There's been concerned talk about your absence. Gathering herbs on the mountain, she replied, unlocking her shop door. Has something happened? Wells followed her inside, lowering his voice. First case confirmed this afternoon. Lily Chen, age 6, high fever, distinctive rash beginning on the extremities. Eleanor felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. How severe? Advancing rapidly. I've tried cold compresses, willow bark tea, the usual measures. He hesitated. I understand you consulted the mountain hermit about treatments. Mr. Everett has extensive knowledge of medicinal plants. Eleanor said carefully, avoiding confirmation of Nathaniel's true identity. He helped me locate a specific herb that may help manage the fever. Wells's expression tightened. I must insist, Mrs. Montgomery, that you not administer any untested remedies. This is a medical matter requiring proper medical attention. Eleanor removed her coat, hanging it deliberately before responding. With all due respect, Dr. Wells, my remedies have proven effective for many ailments over the years. I have no intention of doing harm. Nevertheless, as the town physician, Eleanor interrupted gently, your hands are full with Lily Chen and any new cases that may emerge. Allow me to support your efforts with complementary treatments. Wells seemed about to argue further when the shop door opened. Emily Watson entered, her small face worried. Miss Nora Ma sent me to fetch you. She says Lily's taken worse and Dr. Wells's medicine isn't helping. Wells's face flushed with embarrassment and concern. I was just headed back there myself. Eleanor quickly gathered supplies, including the precious vial from Silver Ridge. I'll come immediately, Emily. As they walked to the Chen household, Eleanor felt the weight of the journal in her bag. Inside those pages might be the key to fighting this disease if she could decipher Nathaniel and Catherine's research in time. The Chen home was thick with the distinctive smell of sickness, sweat, fear, and the cloying sweetness of infection. Mrs. Chen, a slight woman whose family had come to Willowbrook to open a laundry service, led them to Lily's bedside. The child lay motionless except for the rapid rise and fall of her chest. Her skin burned with fever, and an angry red rash covered her arms and legs. Eleanor's heart constricted at the sight, so similar to how William had looked in his final hours. Dr. Wells immediately began examining the girl, his earlier argument with Eleanor apparently forgotten in the face of the child's suffering. Eleanor prepared a cool compress, then carefully mixed a small amount of the feverfew powder with water. What is that? Wells asked sharply, noticing the mixture. A febrifuge, Eleanor answered. It may help reduce the fever. I cannot authorize experimental treatments, Wells insisted. Mrs. Chen, who had been watching silently, suddenly spoke. Will it help my daughter? Eleanor met the woman's desperate gaze. It may. I've seen it work for similar symptoms. Then give it to her, Mrs. Chen said firmly. Please. Wells looked as though he might object, but something in Mrs. Chen's expression stopped him. He stepped back, allowing Eleanor access to the child. With gentle movements, Eleanor supported Lily's head and helped her drink the mixture. The girl swallowed reflexively, too weak to resist. It will take time to show effects, Onan explained. Keep applying the cool compresses. I'll prepare more medicine and return in a few hours. Outside the Chen home, Wells confronted Eleanor. What exactly did you give that child? A compound of alpine feverfew and other herbs that reduce fever and inflammation, she replied. Nothing dangerous, I assure you. And you learned this from the mountain man? Wells's tone was skeptical but less hostile than before. Among other sources, Eleanor hesitated, then decided to take a risk. Dr. Wells, I believe I know what this disease is. It matches descriptions in medical journals of a fever that struck settlements in Colorado 3 years ago. Conventional treatments proved largely ineffective. Wells's expression changed slightly. I've read those accounts. The mortality rate was nearly 70%. Yes, but there were reports of a physician who developed alternative treatments with significantly better outcomes. Eleanor watched his face carefully. A Dr. Nathaniel Everett. Wells went very still. That name is not well regarded in medical circles, Mrs. Montgomery. Perhaps not, but his results speak for themselves, don't they? Isn't that why Judge Wallace sent men to consult him? The older doctor seemed to age before her eyes, shoulders slumping slightly. I knew Everett. Before. I was one of many who signed the petition against his methods. This admission surprised Eleanor. You knew he was living here? I recognized him 3 years ago when he first came to town for supplies. He saw me too, though we both pretended otherwise. Wells rubbed his tired eyes. Pride is a terrible thing, Mrs. Montgomery. It's kept me from approaching him even knowing his expertise might be valuable. Eleanor felt a new respect for the physician's honesty. It's not too late to put pride aside, doctor. Not if it means saving lives. Wells nodded slowly. Perhaps you're right. In the meantime, I would be interested to know more about this treatment you've begun with Lily Chen. Come to my shop tomorrow morning, Eleanor offered. I'll share what I know. As they parted ways, Eleanor felt a cautious hope. If Dr. Wells could overcome his professional prejudices, perhaps others could too. Perhaps even Nathaniel might find his way back to his calling. That night, after checking again on Lily, whose fever had marginally decreased, Eleanor sat at her desk, with Nathaniel's journal open before her. By lamplight, she pored over the detailed notes, diagrams, and observations. Catherine's elegant script alternated with Nathaniel's more angular handwriting, the two voices creating a scientific dialogue that spanned years of collaboration. One entry in particular caught her attention, dated 3 months before the Boston epidemic. Compound E shows promising results in vitro. Extraction method critical to efficacy. C suggests binding agent to improve cellular absorption. Trial scheduled for next month, pending board approval. The next entry in Catherine's handwriting revealed frustration. Board denied trial authorization. Concerns about unorthodox methodology despite preliminary results. N continues research privately. I fear time is against us with reports of fever cases in Harbor District. The final entries documented the epidemic's progression and the Everetts' increasingly desperate attempts to implement their treatments despite institutional resistance. The last page, written in Nathaniel's shaky hand after Catherine's death, contained a single line, "They wouldn't let me save them." Eleanor closed the journal, heart heavy with the weight of what might have been. Tomorrow she would return to Silver Ridge with this knowledge and with news of Lily Chen's condition. Somehow she had to convince Nathaniel that his work still mattered, that he still had the power to heal. Outside her window, the autumn moon illuminated Willowbrook's quiet streets. In homes throughout the town, parents watched over sleeping children, unaware of the invisible threat creeping toward them. Eleanor thought of Emily Watson, of all the children who might soon face the same fight as Lily Chen. For their sakes, she had to succeed in bringing Nathaniel Everett back from his self-imposed exile. The mountain man needed to remember he was still a doctor. Nathaniel couldn't sleep. He paced his cabin, mind churning with unwelcome thoughts and memories. Eleanor's visit had disturbed more than his solitude. It had cracked the protective shell he'd built around his past. Lobo watched from his corner, yellow eyes reflecting the dying firelight. "What are you looking at?" Nathaniel muttered. "This doesn't concern you." But even as he said it, he knew the wolf understood more than most humans would credit. Animals sense changes in the emotional weather as surely as they detected coming storms. Nathaniel moved to his desk, feeling strangely untethered without the familiar weight of his journal. Had he been reckless in entrusting it to Eleanor? The book contained more than medical research. It held his heart's blood, the record of his life with Catherine and their shared dreams. Outside, the night wind whispered through pine branches, a sound that usually soothed him. Tonight, it only emphasized his isolation. For the first time in years, Nathaniel found himself acutely aware of his aloneness. He thought of the child Eleanor had mentioned, Emily Watson, who reminded her of Elizabeth. His daughter would have been 12 now, on the cusp of womanhood. The pain of that loss, usually dulled by time and routine, suddenly felt fresh again. "What would you have me do, Catherine?" He asked the empty room. "Return to a world that rejected everything we believed in. Risk failing again." The silence offered no answers, but Lobo rose and limped to Nathaniel's side, pressing against his leg in an uncharacteristic display of affection. Nathaniel absently stroked the wolf's thick fur. "At least you'll heal," he told the animal. "Simple injuries have simple cures." But infectious disease was anything but simple. It was complex, adaptable, ruthless. Fighting it required not just knowledge, but courage, the courage to try unproven methods when conventional approaches failed. Courage he'd once possessed in abundance before grief and rejection had worn it away. A sudden sound outside caught his attention, not the wind, but movement, human movement. Nathaniel tensed, reaching for his rifle. Visitors in daylight were unusual enough. Nocturnal arrivals meant trouble. "Who's there?" he called through the door. "Nathaniel, it's Eleanor Montgomery. I need your help." He opened the door to find her on his porch, breathless and clearly exhausted. And behind her, moonlight revealed a second figure, Dr. Harold Wells, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "What's happened?" Nathaniel asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Lily Chen is worse," Eleanor said. "The fever dropped briefly with your medicine, but it's risen again, higher than before. 5 more children have shown symptoms since sundown." Nathaniel's gaze shifted to Wells, whom he hadn't spoken to in the decades since arriving in Willowbrook. "And you, doctor, what brings you to my door after all these years?" Wells removed his hat, a gesture of both respect and contrition. "Professional desperation, Dr. Everett. I've exhausted my conventional treatments without effect. Mrs. Montgomery believes your research might offer solutions I cannot." The use of his title, the acknowledgement of his expertise, these were significant concessions from a man who had once signed the petition condemning his methods. "May we come in?" Eleanor asked. "Time is critical." Nathaniel hesitated, then stepped aside. As the visitors entered, Lobo growled softly. "Your wolf has good instincts," Wells commented, eyeing the animal warily. "Better than mine, apparently," Nathaniel replied. "I let humans in." Eleanor removed her coat, moving with the efficiency of someone accustomed to medical emergencies. "I've brought your journal. There's a treatment protocol described in the later entries, Compound E with a binding agent. Catherine's notes suggest it showed the most promise." Nathaniel took the offered journal, fingers tracing the familiar leather cover. "Compound E was experimental. We never completed the trials." "But your preliminary results were significant," Wells said. "I've reviewed the documentation Mrs. Montgomery shared. Your approach was unorthodox, but the scientific reasoning is sound." "Now you see it," Nathaniel said bitterly. 10 years ago, you and your colleagues saw only danger and heresy." Wells accepted the rebuke with a nod. "Medicine advances through the correction of errors, Dr. Everett, including errors of judgment." The admission, simple yet profound, momentarily silenced Nathaniel's anger. He opened the journal to the relevant pages, reviewing the formula and preparation methods he and Catherine had developed. "Even if I agreed to help," he said finally, "Compound E requires specific ingredients, proper laboratory conditions." "I've brought everything I could gather," Eleanor interrupted, opening her bag to reveal an assortment of vials, powders, and botanical specimens. "My shop isn't a proper laboratory, but it has basic equipment. What else do we need?" Nathaniel examined the supplies, mind already calculating possibilities and alternatives. Despite his reluctance, the physician in him responded to the challenge. "There's a rare fungus that grows on fallen logs near the creek," he said. "It contains the binding agent we need, and I'll need more of the feverfew properly prepared." "I can help gather those," Eleanor offered, "and I can provide whatever medical supplies are needed from my office," Wells added. Nathaniel looked between them, these unexpected allies who had breached his solitude with their urgency and hope. Part of him wanted to refuse to protect himself from the pain of potential failure, from reopening wounds long scarred over. But another part, long dormant, stirred with purpose. The healer he had once been, the man Catherine had loved and believed in, whispered that this was his responsibility, perhaps even his redemption. Lobo had settled back in his corner, watching the humans with curious eyes. The wolf's presence reminded Nathaniel of his own journey toward healing, halting reluctant but progressing nonetheless. "We'll need to work through the night," he said finally, "and I make no promises about the outcome." Relief flooded Eleanor's face. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Nathaniel cautioned. We may already be too late. As they began organizing the supplies and planning their approach, Nathaniel felt the weight of years lifting slightly from his shoulders. For better or worse, he had stepped back onto the path he had abandoned a decade ago. The mountain man was becoming a doctor once more. The night passed in a blur of focused activity. Nathaniel directed the preparation of Compound E with the precision of a man reconnecting with his life's work. Eleanor assisted seamlessly, her nursing training evident in every movement. Even Wells, despite his age and conventional medical background, contributed valuable insights and modifications. By dawn, they had produced a small quantity of the medicine, an amber-colored liquid that represented their best hope against the spreading illness. It needs to be administered in carefully measured doses, Nathaniel explained as they bottled the precious compound. Too little is ineffective, too much could be toxic. I'll ensure the dosages are precise, Wells promised. Eleanor, exhausted but determined, began packing the medicine for transport to town. Will you come with us, Nathaniel? Your expertise would be invaluable in monitoring the patient's responses. Nathaniel hesitated, the prospect of entering the town, of facing the community that had relegated him to the status of eccentric hermit, filling him with apprehension. I think it's better if Dr. Wells handles the administration. These are your methods, your research, Wells pointed out. No one understands the treatment better than you. I haven't practiced medicine on humans in 10 years. But you haven't forgotten, Eleanor said softly. I've watched you work all night. Your hands still move with a doctor's certainty. Before Nathaniel could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Rushing to the door, they found Sheriff Reed dismounting his horse, his expression grave. Dr. Wells, Mrs. Montgomery, thank God, he said. We've been searching since midnight. The Chen girl took a turn for the worse, and now there are 8 more cases, including Emily Watson. The name struck Nathaniel like a physical blow. Emily, the child Eleanor had said, reminded her of Elizabeth. We've prepared medicine, Wells said, gesturing to their work. But we need to administer it quickly. Reed's gaze shifted to Nathaniel, standing in the doorway of his cabin. Dr. Everett Judge Wallace requests your presence in town. He's offering amnesty for any past issues. Amnesty, as if he were a criminal rather than a physician who had dared challenge medical orthodoxy. Nathaniel felt the familiar bitterness rising. The medicine will work without my presence, he said stiffly. Nathaniel, Eleanor began, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. Take what we've made. It should be enough for the current cases. I'll prepare more if needed. Eleanor looked as though she might argue further, but the urgency of the situation prevailed. She and Wells quickly gathered their supplies and followed Reed to where extra horses waited. As they prepared to depart, Eleanor turned back to Nathaniel. This isn't just about the medicine. Those children need to see strength and hope. You represent both. They'll have you, Nathaniel replied. That's better than a stranger with a questionable reputation. Eleanor held his gaze for a long moment, disappointment evident in her expression. Then she mounted her horse and joined the others on the trail back to Willowbrook. Nathaniel watched them disappear among the trees, an unexpected hollowness spreading in his chest. He had helped create the medicine, had shared his knowledge. Wasn't that enough? Lobo limped to his side, pressing against his leg, as if sensing his turmoil. I did what they asked, Nathaniel told the wolf. The rest is up to them. But even as he spoke, he knew he was rationalizing his fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of caring too much only to lose again. The very fears that had driven him to this mountain a decade ago. Inside the cabin, evidence of their night's work remained scattered across his desk notes, botanical specimens, discarded materials. Nathaniel began cleaning methodically, trying to restore the order and simplicity that had defined his existence before Eleanor Montgomery had knocked on his door. Yet as he worked, her words echoed in his mind. Those children need to see strength and hope. You represent both. Did he? Or was he merely a broken man, hiding from his past, using solitude as a shield against further pain? Nathaniel paused, hands resting on the journal he and Catherine had created together. What would she think of him now? Would she recognize the man she had loved in this mountain hermit who refused to face the world? The answer came with painful clarity, no. Catherine had never run from challenges. Even as death approached, she had fought to preserve their research, believing it might save others, even if it couldn't save her. Eleanor's revelation about Catherine asking her to memorize their notes before the hospital cleared her office had affected Nathaniel deeply. It meant Catherine had never lost faith in their work or in him. Outside, the morning sun illuminated Silver Ridge in autumn glory. The world beyond his self-imposed exile continued its inexorable cycle of life, death, and renewal. And in Willowbrook, children fought for their lives, with only part of the help he could offer. Nathaniel looked at Lobo, who watched him with those knowing yellow eyes. "What would you do?" he asked the wolf. Lobo tilted his head as if considering the question seriously. Then with deliberate movements, he limped to the door and scratched at it. Nathaniel gave a rueful laugh. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one who failed before." But the wolf's simple gesture resonated with something deep within him. Lobo had been injured, trapped, nearly killed. Yet here he was, still willing to venture out to face whatever awaited beyond the door. With sudden decision, Nathaniel gathered essential supplies, including ingredients for more medicine. He packed them efficiently in his saddlebag along with the journal. "I won't be long," he told Lobo, scratching the wolf behind the ears. "Rest that leg while I'm gone." Lobo settled onto his blanket, watching as Nathaniel donned a coat he rarely wore and strapped on his medical bag, unused for years, but still maintained out of habit. Outside, Nathaniel mounted his horse with practiced ease. The trail to Willowbrook stretched before him, winding down from his sanctuary into the world of human complexity and pain he had so long avoided. With one last glance at his cabin, Dr. Nathaniel Everett urged his horse forward, leaving the safety of his isolation behind. Whether toward redemption or further heartbreak, he couldn't know. But for the first time in 10 years, he was willing to find out. The descent from Silver Ridge revealed Willowbrook in ways Nathaniel hadn't seen in years. From his isolated cabin, the town was merely a cluster of structures in the valley, distant, abstract, irrelevant to his daily existence. But as he approached, details emerged: smoke rising from chimneys, laundry fluttering on lines, the steeple of the small church pointing skyward like an accusatory finger. And something else, an unusual stillness. No children played in yards. Few people moved along the streets. Willowbrook held its breath as communities did when death walked among them. Nathaniel's horse sensed his tension, tossing its head as they entered the main street. Eyes turned toward him, curious, hopeful, suspicious. He kept his gaze forward, ignoring the whispers that followed his progress. The Chen household was easy to identify by the cluster of people outside: concerned neighbors, relatives, the merely curious. Nathaniel dismounted, medical bag in hand, and approached the door. The crowd parted, their expressions a mixture of reverence and fear. "It's the mountain doctor," someone whispered. "They say he speaks to wolves," another added. Nathaniel ignored them, knocking firmly. The door opened to reveal Eleanor, her face drawn with fatigue, but brightening at the sight of him. "You came," she said simply. "How is the child?" Holding her own. "Your medicine helped stabilize the fever, but the rash is spreading." Eleanor stood aside. "Come in." Inside, the small home was arranged as an improvised sick room. Lily Chen lay on a bed, her tiny form nearly lost among blankets. Her mother sat beside her, applying cool compresses. Dr. Wells stood nearby, examining another child, a boy of about 5, who lay on a pallet on the floor. Wells looked up, surprise crossing his features. "Dr. Everett, I didn't expect—" "I brought materials for more medicine," Nathaniel said, avoiding sentimentality, "and thought I should see the patient's responses firsthand." Eleanor touched his arm lightly, a gesture of gratitude he neither expected nor felt he deserved. Nathaniel approached Lily's bedside, introducing himself quietly to Mrs. Chen. The woman's exhausted face showed a flicker of hope as she made space for him. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to examine the child. Mrs. Chen nodded, and Nathaniel began his assessment with the methodical precision that had once made him a respected physician. Lily's pulse was rapid, but not dangerously so. Her breathing was labored but regular. The rash, however, concerned him. It had the distinctive pattern he remembered from previous outbreaks, but with unusual discoloration at the edges. "When did you administer the last dose?" he asked Wells. 2 hours ago. Initial response was positive, temperature dropped almost 2 degrees, but it's rising again now. Nathaniel nodded, opening his bag to retrieve a small vial. "This is a modified version. The original formula needs adjustment for this particular strain." Wells approached professional interest, overcoming any lingering awkwardness. "You believe it's a variant?" "The rash pattern suggests a mutation. The base pathogen is similar to yellow fever, but it's adapted become more aggressive in penetrating tissue. Nathaniel prepared a small dose in a dropper. This should help the medicine cross the blood barrier more effectively. Eleanor watched from nearby, her nurse's training evident in the way she anticipated his needs, handing him items before he asked. Together they administered the medicine to Lily, then to the boy on the pallet. "How many cases now?" Nathaniel asked as they worked. 11 confirmed, Wells replied. "All children, so far, ages 4 to 12. The Chen girl was first." "Yes, then Thomas Harper there." Wells nodded to the boy they'd just treated. "After that, it spread quickly. Emily Watson fell ill just after midnight." Nathaniel paused. "I'd like to see her next." As they prepared to leave for their next patient, Sheriff Reed appeared at the door. "Dr. Everett, Judge Wallace requests your presence at the town hall immediately." Nathaniel straightened, irritation flashing across his features. "I'm in the middle of treating critically ill patients, Sheriff." "I understand, sir, but the judge was most insistent. There's a town meeting gathering. People are frightened, demanding answers." Eleanor stepped forward. "Surely it can wait until—" "It's all right," Nathaniel interrupted. "I'll speak with Wallace briefly, then continue my rounds. Dr. Wells, please proceed with the dosage schedule we discussed for these patients." Outside, Nathaniel was struck again by the town's unnatural quiet. Even the birds seemed subdued, as if nature itself respected the gravity of the situation. As he and Eleanor walked toward the town hall, whispers followed them like shadows. "Why are they staring?" he muttered. "You're a legend here," Eleanor replied. "The mysterious healer from the mountain. Some believe you have supernatural powers." "Ridiculous superstition. Is it you live alone on a mountain commune with wolves and appear only when death threatens the town? What would you call it?" Before he could respond, they reached the town hall, a modest wooden building that served multiple civic functions. Inside, a crowd had gathered their voices, creating a nervous hum that ceased abruptly when Nathaniel entered. At the front of the room stood Judge George Wallace, an imposing figure at 70, with steel gray hair and the bearing of a man accustomed to authority. Beside him sat several town council members and prominent citizens. "Dr. Everett," Wallace's voice carried across the room, "thank you for honoring our request. Your expertise is sorely needed in this crisis." Nathaniel nodded curtly, uncomfortable with the sudden attention of so many eyes. He remained near the door, unwilling to fully enter this arena of public scrutiny. "I understand you've begun treating the afflicted children with a medicine of your own devising," Wallace continued. "Can you tell us what we're facing? How dangerous is this disease?" Nathaniel chose his words carefully, aware that in situations like this, panic could be as deadly as the disease itself. "We're dealing with a fever similar to those I've treated before. It's serious, but not necessarily fatal with proper treatment." "Not necessarily fatal?" a voice called from the crowd. "Miners' Rest lost 15 people in 3 days." Murmurs of fear rippled through the gathering. "They didn't have access to the specific treatment we're implementing," Nathaniel replied. "Dr. Wells and Mrs. Montgomery are administering medicine that has shown effectiveness against similar outbreaks." "And you guarantee this will work?" Wallace pressed. Nathaniel met the judge's gaze directly. "No physician can guarantee outcomes, Judge Wallace. We can only apply our best knowledge and efforts." "But you've seen this before, treated it successfully." This from a woman clutching a young child protectively to her chest. "I've treated similar infections with positive results, yes." "Then why were you hiding on that mountain instead of helping when the first case appeared?" someone shouted. The accusation hung in the air, giving voice to the question many must have been thinking. Nathaniel felt Eleanor tense beside him, ready to defend, but he placed a restraining hand on her arm. "I wasn't hiding," he said, addressing the crowd rather than the individual questioner. "I was living according to my choice, as is my right. Now I'm here offering what help I can. Take it or leave it." Wallace stepped forward, clearly sensing the potential for the meeting to turn hostile. "We're grateful for your assistance, Doctor. What do you need from us to fight this outbreak effectively?" This practical question shifted the mood. Nathaniel felt on firmer ground, discussing logistics rather than defending his life choices. "Clean water, fresh linens, volunteers to help care for the sick. We need a central location to treat patients rather than moving between homes. And we need people willing to gather specific plants from the surrounding hills. Mrs. Montgomery can provide guidance on what to look for." Eleanor nodded, stepping forward to stand beside him in silent support. The church can serve as a temporary hospital, offered Pastor Mitchell, a thin man with kind eyes. The main hall is large enough for several beds. My wife and I will organize volunteers, added Mr. Barnes, the general store owner. As practical matters took precedence over fear, Nathaniel felt the tension in the room dissipate somewhat. Wallace seemed satisfied with the turn of the discussion, but Nathaniel noticed the judge watching him with an appraising gaze that suggested ulterior motives. One more thing, Nathaniel added. I need access to water samples from various points around town, particularly those used for drinking, and information about any recent changes to the landscape, new mining operations, lumber activity, anything that might affect the watershed. Wallace's expression changed subtly. The water is perfectly safe, Doctor. We test it regularly. Nevertheless, I'd like to examine it myself. Certain infectious agents are too small to detect through conventional means. Of course, Wallace conceded, though his tone had cooled. Sheriff Reed will assist you with whatever you need. As the meeting dispersed, people breaking into groups to organize the various tasks, Wallace approached Nathaniel directly. A word in private, Doctor. Eleanor gave Nathaniel a questioning look, but he nodded for her to proceed without him. I'll meet you at the Watson home, he told her. Wallace led Nathaniel to a small office off the main hall, closing the door behind them. The room was spartanly furnished, dominated by a desk covered with papers and a map of the region pinned to one wall. I appreciate your discretion about the possible causes of this outbreak, Wallace began. Mass panic would only complicate our response. I haven't determined any cause yet, Nathaniel replied carefully. The water testing is standard procedure in such cases. Wallace nodded, seating himself behind the desk. Willowbrook has changed since you last participated in town life. We've grown prospered. The Silverton Mining Company has brought jobs, investment, and environmental changes, Nathaniel added. Progress requires adaptation, Doctor. Surely as a man of science you understand this. Wallace leaned forward. What concerns me is the potential for unfounded speculation to damage our community's economic prospects. The implication was clear enough. Nathaniel studied the older man, noting the expensive quality of his clothing, the signet ring that had suggested connections beyond this small town. My only concern is treating the sick and preventing further spread of the disease, Nathaniel said. But if environmental factors are contributing into the outbreak, identifying them would be part of any comprehensive response. Naturally, Wallace smiled thinly. I merely suggest focusing on treatment rather than theoretical causes, especially given your history with unorthodox theories. The reference to his past felt like a deliberate provocation. Nathaniel controlled his expression with effort. My unorthodox theories are currently your best hope for saving those children, Judge Wallace. I suggest you remember that. Without waiting for a response, Nathaniel turned and left the office. The encounter had confirmed his suspicions that there was more to this outbreak than natural causes and that Wallace knew more than he was sharing. Outside the town hall, Nathaniel paused to orient himself. Willowbrook had indeed grown since his rare visits for supplies. New buildings lined streets that had once been empty, and the sounds of construction echoed from the north end of town. A movement caught his eye, Sheriff Reed approaching with a worried expression. Dr. Everett, you're needed urgently at the Watson home. The child has taken a turn. Cold dread settled in Nathaniel's stomach as he hurried through the streets, Reed keeping pace beside him. The memory of losing his own daughter rose unbidden. Her small face contorted with pain as the fever consumed her. His desperate attempts to ease her suffering. Catherine's silent tears as they realized their treatments had come too late. Not again. The thought pounded in his mind with each rapid heartbeat. Not again. The Watson home was modest but well-maintained, with curtains at the windows and flowering plants along the walkway. Inside, the atmosphere was tense with fear. Eleanor knelt beside a small bed where Emily Watson lay, her skin flushed with fever, breathing labored. Mrs. Watson stood nearby, hands clasped in prayer or desperation or both. What happened? Nathaniel asked, immediately moving to the bedside. Fever spiked suddenly, Eleanor reported. She began seizing about 10 minutes ago. I've administered the medicine and cold compresses, but her temperature continues to rise. Nathaniel placed a hand on the child's forehead, feeling the unnatural heat radiating from her skin. Emily's eyes fluttered open, briefly unfocused and bright with fever. Something in their blue depths reminded him painfully of Elizabeth. We need to cool her body immediately, he said, slipping into the authoritative tone of his hospital days. Prepare a bath with room temperature water, not cold that would shock her system. We'll add ice gradually to bring her temperature down slowly. Mrs. Watson moved immediately to comply, grateful for clear direction in the face of her helplessness. Eleanor and Nathaniel carefully lifted Emily, carrying her to the washroom where a copper tub was being filled. Her fever is behaving differently than the others, Eleanor observed quietly as they worked. More aggressive, more resistant to the medicine. Each person's response varies, Nathaniel replied, though he shared her concern. But yes, this is unusual. They placed Emily in the bath, supporting her head as Mrs. Watson added small amounts of ice as directed. The child whimpered, semi-conscious, her small body trembling despite the fever. It's all right, Emily, Nathaniel found himself saying, voice gentler than he'd intended. You're going to be all right. Whether she heard or understood was unclear, but her agitation seemed to ease slightly at the sound of his voice. For nearly an hour, they worked to gradually reduce her temperature, refreshing the water as needed, monitoring her pulse and breathing. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Emily's fever began to recede. The flush in her cheeks diminished, her breathing became less labored. By late afternoon, she had stabilized enough to be returned to her bed wrapped in clean, dry linens. She's responding, Eleanor said, relief evident in her voice. The worst has passed, I think. Mrs. Watson wept silently, clasping Nathaniel's hand in gratitude. Thank you, doctor. Everyone said you could work miracles. Not miracles, Nathaniel corrected gently. Just medicine. Your daughter is strong, that made the difference. As they prepared to leave, Emily's eyes opened. Clear, now free of the fever's days, they focused on Nathaniel with a child's direct curiosity. Are you the wolf man? She asked, voice weak but distinct. Nathaniel blinked, surprised by the question. Some people call me that, he admitted. Ma says you live in the forest and talk to animals. I live on the mountain, he corrected, and animals and I understand each other sometimes. Emily seemed to consider this seriously. Do you have a wolf? Nathaniel felt Eleanor watching him, a smile playing at her lips. Not exactly, but there is a wolf who's staying with me while his leg heals. I'd like to see him someday, Emily said, eyelids growing heavy as exhaustion claimed her. Perhaps you will. Nathaniel found himself promising, though he had no intention of encouraging visitors to his mountain. Outside the Watson home, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Willowbrook. Nathaniel and Eleanor stood for a moment in silence, processing the intensity of the past few hours. We should check on the others, Eleanor finally said, and the church preparations. Nathaniel nodded, but his mind was elsewhere, on Wallace's veiled warnings, on Emily's remarkable recovery, on the strange sense that he had stepped back into a world he thought he'd left forever. What did Wallace want? Eleanor asked as they walked, seeming to read his thoughts. To warn me against looking too closely at potential environmental causes of the outbreak. He's concerned about economic impact on the town. Eleanor's expression darkened. The mining company. They've expanded operations significantly in the past year. There are new tailings ponds north of town, near the watershed. Very near. Dr. Wells raised concerns about potential contamination months ago, but Wallace dismissed them, said the company had implemented all required safety measures. Nathaniel filed this information away, his suspicions growing. I need to see those water samples as soon as possible, and I'd like to examine the mining area myself. That might be difficult. The company restricts access, claims it's for safety reasons. I'm sure they do, Nathaniel said dryly. At the church, transformation was already underway. Pews had been pushed aside to make room for beds brought from various homes. Women organized linens and supplies while men carried in water barrels and firewood for heating. Pastor Mitchell directed activities with surprising efficiency. Dr. Everett, the pastor greeted them, we're nearly ready for patients. Will you inspect our arrangements? Nathaniel did so, making suggestions for improved ventilation and the organization of a separate area for preparing medicines. Eleanor moved among the volunteers, explaining how to recognize symptoms and basic care procedures. As darkness fell, the first patients were transferred to the makeshift hospital, Lily Chen Thomas Harper and 3 others whose conditions were stable enough for movement. Dr. Wells supervised their care while more serious cases like Emily Watson remained in their homes for now. You should rest, Nathaniel told Eleanor, as they finished setting up a small laboratory area in what had been the pastor's study. You've been working without pause since yesterday. So have you, she countered. Though fatigue was evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. I'm accustomed to long hours alone. You've been managing the town's fears as well as the patients. Eleanor sighed, acknowledging the truth of his observation. I'll rest if you will. There's a small cottage behind my shop. It was my husband's office once. You can use it tonight. Nathaniel had planned to return to his cabin, uncomfortable with the prospect of spending the night in town. But practicality won out. He was needed here, and the journey up and down the mountain would waste valuable time and energy. Thank you, he conceded. But first I want to check the most recent water samples. In the small laboratory they had established, Nathaniel examined drops of water from various sources around Willowbrook using the microscope Eleanor had brought from her shop. What he saw confirmed his suspicions. Microscopic particles suspended in samples from the North Creek particles with the distinctive appearance of mineral residue and chemical compounds. Found something? Eleanor asked, watching his intense concentration. Possible contamination from the mining operation. I'd need more sophisticated equipment to identify it precisely, but the pattern is consistent with what I've seen in other mining regions. Could it cause the fever? Not directly, but it could weaken the immune system, making children more vulnerable to infection. Nathaniel straightened from the microscope. We need to investigate the mining area, see exactly what's being released into the watershed. Wallace won't allow it, Eleanor warned. He's heavily invested in Silverton's operations financially and politically. Nathaniel's jaw set with determination. Wallace doesn't own the mountain. I know ways to approach the area that don't require his permission. You're suggesting trespassing on mining property. I'm suggesting that saving lives takes precedence over property rights. Nathaniel began organizing the samples for further testing. But that can wait until morning. For now, let's check on the patients once more, then follow your sensible advice about rest. The church was quiet when they returned to the main hall, patients sleeping under the watchful eyes of volunteer attendants. Derwell Wells sat near Lily Chen, whose condition had improved markedly since the afternoon. Her fever's broken completely, Wells reported. The others are responding well too. Your medicine is working, Everett. The use of his surname without the formal doctor struck Nathaniel as a small but significant gesture of professional acceptance. Let's hope it continues, he replied, checking Lily's pulse and breathing. The crucial period will be the next 24 hours. If the fever doesn't return, we can be cautiously optimistic. After ensuring all patients were stable, Nathaniel followed Eleanor to her shop and the promised accommodations. The cottage behind the apothecary was small but clean furnished, simply with a bed desk and chair. Books lined one wall, medical texts, botanical references, journals of natural philosophy. James used this as his study, Eleanor explained. After his surveying work ended, he became interested in local flora and geology. He was mapping the region when... She trailed off, the memory still painful. When the fever took him, Nathaniel finished gently. Eleanor nodded. Him and William within days of each other. I've kept his books, his notes. Sometimes I feel he was on the verge of discoveries that might have changed things if he'd had more time. Nathaniel understood that feeling intimately, the weight of unfinished work of potential cut short by death. It was what had driven him and Catherine, what had ultimately led to their downfall in the medical community's eyes. Get some rest, Eleanor, he said. Tomorrow will demand much from both of us. You as well, Nathaniel. She hesitated at the door. Thank you for coming down from your mountain. I know what it cost you. After she left, Nathaniel explored the cottage more thoroughly, examining the books and notes James Montgomery had left behind. The man had been methodical, intelligent, his observations about local geology particularly detailed. One journal caught Nathaniel's attention, dated the year of Montgomery's death. It contained surveys of Silver Ridge and the surrounding area, including notes about water quality and unusual mineral deposits. A map inside the back cover showed the watershed in detail, with markings indicating what appeared to be areas of concern. Nathaniel studied the map carefully. If Montgomery had identified potential water contamination 5 years ago, before the mining expansion, Wallace had mentioned it, suggested the issue might be more complex than recent industrial activity alone. Too tired to pursue the question further, tonight Nathaniel finally lay down on the narrow bed. Sleep came reluctantly, filled with dreams of Catherine and the children of fever victims in Boston, of Lobo running through moonlit forests. And weaving through it all, Eleanor's voice calling him back from his self-imposed exile. Dawn broke over Willowbrook, painting the town in soft gold light that belied the gravity of its situation. Nathaniel woke from restless sleep, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings. The cottage, with its books and scholarly atmosphere, was a stark contrast to his rustic cabin. He rose and prepared for the day, mind already formulating plans. First, check on the patients, then investigate the mining operation and its potential connection to the outbreak. And somewhere in between, prepare more medicine. Their current supply would soon be exhausted if new cases appeared. The apothecary shop was already busy when Nathaniel emerged from the cottage. Eleanor moved efficiently among shelves and counters, preparing treatments for various ailments beyond the fever. The routine illnesses of the town continued alongside the crisis, demanding attention. "Good morning," she greeted him. "There's coffee and bread on the back table." Wells sent word all patients remained stable through the night, no new cases reported. "Good news," Nathaniel acknowledged, accepting the offered sustenance. "I'd like to examine the mining area today based on the water samples and what you've told me about the expansion." Eleanor nodded. "I thought you might. I've prepared a map showing the best approach roads." She retrieved a folded paper from beneath the counter. James surveyed that entire region. He noted several paths that avoid the main company roads. "Thank you." Nathaniel studied the map, recognizing some landmarks from his own explorations of the mountain. "I should be able to reach the tailings ponds without being observed." "You shouldn't go alone," Eleanor said. "The terrain is treacherous in places, and if company guards spot you, I've managed worse, and someone needs to continue treating the patients." "Dr. Wells seems to have that well in hand," she countered, "and I know the paths better than you do." James showed me his survey routes. Nathaniel wanted to refuse to protect her from both physical danger and potential legal consequences. But Eleanor's determined expression suggested argument would be futile, and practically speaking, a guide familiar with the terrain would be valuable. "Very well," he conceded, "but we'll need to move quickly and quietly. When can you be ready?" "Give me 30 minutes to organize the day's medicines and brief my assistant." While Eleanor prepared, Nathaniel visited the church-turned-hospital. The scene was encouraging, patients resting comfortably, fevers reduced, the atmosphere calm and organized. Dr. Wells reported that Emily Watson had continued to improve and might be moved to the church later that day. "Your treatment protocol is proving remarkably effective," Wells admitted. "I've been studying your notes on the binding agent. Fascinating approach, completely contradicts standard practice, yet the results speak for themselves." "Catherine deserves much of the credit," Nathaniel said. "She identified the key compounds while I focused on delivery methods." "Your wife was a remarkable physician." Wells agreed, surprising Nathaniel with this acknowledgement. The medical community lost much when she passed. The simple statement, free of condescension or qualification, touched Nathaniel deeply. "Yes," he managed, "we did." Their conversation was interrupted by Sheriff Reed's arrival, his expression troubled. "Dr. Everett Judge Wallace is asking for a progress report at the town hall. Says it's urgent." Nathaniel checked his pocket watch. "I have an appointment I can't postpone. Please inform the judge I'll meet with him this afternoon." Reed looked uncomfortable. "He was quite insistent, Doctor." "So am I, Sheriff. The patients are my priority. Wallace will have to wait." After Reed departed, Wells raised an eyebrow. "You're the first person I've seen stand up to Wallace in years. He's accumulated considerable influence since becoming invested in the mining operations." "Is that common knowledge, his financial interest in Silverton?" "Not officially, but in a town this size, connections become apparent over time." Wells lowered his voice. "There are rumors the company plans major expansion next year, new shafts increase production. Wallace stands to profit significantly." This information strengthened Nathaniel's suspicion that Wallace's concern about economic impact masked deeper personal motivations. "I need to examine the mining area," Nathaniel told Wells. "Ms. Montgomery is accompanying me as guide. Can you manage here for a few hours?" Wells nodded. "Of course, but be careful. The company employs private guards who aren't known for their gentle approach to trespassers." "We'll keep that in mind." Nathaniel returned to the apothecary to find Eleanor dressed for the expedition in practical trousers beneath her skirt, sturdy boots, and a dark jacket that wouldn't attract attention. She had packed a small bag with water, food, and basic medical supplies. "Ready?" she asked. "As much as possible. We'll take the north trail out of town, then cut west toward the ridge. Less chance of being observed that way." They departed Willowbrook, quietly avoiding the main streets where they might be noticed and questioned. Eleanor moved with surprising agility over the increasingly rough terrain, clearly familiar with wilderness travel, despite her professional demeanor in town. James taught you well, Nathaniel observed, as she navigated a particularly steep section of trail. He believed a surveyor's wife should be capable in the field, she replied. We spent our first year of marriage in a tent moving with the railroad's progress. After that, the Montana wilderness held few terrors. This glimpse of Eleanor's past, so different from the composed apothecary he'd first encountered, intrigued Nathaniel. She had depths he hadn't anticipated, a resilience born of experience rather than mere determination. As they climbed higher, the landscape changed. The natural beauty of Silver Ridge gave way to areas of cleared forest and carved earth. In the distance, structures of the mining operation came into view: derricks processing, buildings, rail cars waiting to transport ore. There, Eleanor pointed to a series of large ponds surrounded by earthen berms. The tailings ponds. That's where waste material from the processing is stored. They approached cautiously, using stands of remaining trees for cover. The ponds were larger than Nathaniel had expected, their surfaces an unnatural blue-green color that spoke of chemical content. The primary watershed is just beyond that ridge, Eleanor said, indicating a forested hillside. James documented how groundwater flows from these ponds directly into the streams that feed Willowbrook's wells. Nathaniel studied the scene with a scientist's eye. The berms appear inadequate, barely higher than the pond levels. Heavy rain could easily cause overflow. We had significant rainfall 2 weeks ago, Eleanor confirmed. 3 days of storms. Just before the first fever case appeared, Nathaniel noted. The timing fits. They circled the ponds at a safe distance, Nathaniel collecting water and soil samples at various points. The evidence of contamination was clear, even to visual inspection. Unnatural coloration, absence of normal plant growth, dead wildlife near the water's edge. We need to get closer to the main processing facility, Nathaniel said. See exactly what chemicals they're using. Eleanor looked doubtful. That area will be guarded. We won't enter the buildings. I just need to observe the discharge points, perhaps collect samples of the direct waste stream. They moved carefully toward the processing area, using natural cover where possible. The facility was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with multiple buildings connected by conveyor systems and pipelines. Workers moved about, loading ore into crushers and monitoring the separation processes. There, Nathaniel pointed to a large pipe extending from the main building to the nearest tailings pond. That's the primary discharge. If we can get a sample from there, we'll know exactly what's entering the watershed. As they planned their approach, voices suddenly sounded, nearby company guards on patrol. Nathaniel pulled Eleanor behind a large boulder, holding her close as the men passed within yards of their position. Wallace wants the north shaft operational by month's end, one guard was saying. Says the new vein is the richest yet. That's why they're running double shifts at the processor, the other replied. More ore means more waste, though. Those ponds are nearly at capacity. Not our problem. Engineer says they'll build new ones next spring. Meanwhile, the old ones leak like sieves. You seen that creek lately? Water's blue as a robin's egg. Their voices faded as they continued their patrol, but the casual confirmation of their suspicions sent a chill through Nathaniel. If the guards themselves acknowledged the contamination, the company leadership, including Wallace, must be fully aware of the danger. We need that sample, Nathaniel whispered. Eleanor nodded, her expression resolute despite the danger. Together they waited until the patrol had moved well away, then quickly approached the discharge pipe. The waste stream flowing from the pipe was visibly contaminated, an unnatural blue liquid with a chemical odor that burned the nostrils. Nathaniel collected samples in small glass vials, while Eleanor kept watch for returning guards. Hurry, she urged as another patrol appeared in the distance. Nathaniel secured the last sample and they retreated to the cover of the trees, making their way back toward the trail that would return them to Willowbrook. Only when they had put significant distance between themselves and the mining operation did they pause to rest. The contamination is worse than I expected, Nathaniel said, examining the samples. Heavy metals, processing chemicals, it's a toxic mixture. When it enters the drinking water, even in small amounts, it weakens the body's natural defenses, Eleanor finished, making everyone, especially children, more vulnerable to disease. Exactly. The fever itself might be a common pathogen. that normally wouldn't cause serious illness. But combined with this poisoning, we need to alert the town, stop them from using the affected water sources. Nathaniel nodded grimly, which means confronting Wallace. He won't take this lightly, not with his financial interests at stake. We have evidence, Eleanor said, gesturing to the samples, and the patient's responses to treatment support our theory. Their improvement accelerated once they stopped consuming town water. Wallace will claim coincidence. We need more, something definitive that even he can't dismiss. Eleanor considered this, then brightened. James's surveys. He documented water quality over time, showing the changes as mining operations expanded. The records go back 7 years. That could provide the historical context we need, Nathaniel agreed. Where are these surveys? In our cottage, the study you stayed in last night. There's a locked cabinet beneath the bookshelves. I've preserved all his notes. Their return journey to Willowbrook was faster than the outbound trek, urgency lending speed to their steps. As they approached town, however, Eleanor touched Nathaniel's arm, slowing him. Wait, she said, look. Ahead, an unusual level of activity disturbed the town's normally sedate afternoon rhythm. People gathered in small groups, their expressions anxious. Several men on horseback, not locals, judging by their dress, moved between buildings with purpose. Something's happened, Nathaniel observed. They entered town cautiously, Eleanor leading them along back streets toward her shop. As they passed near the church, Dr. Wells emerged, spotting them with evident relief. There you are. Where have you been? Wallace has men searching everywhere for you. What's happened? Eleanor asked. New cases, 7 since noon, different pattern, more aggressive. And not just children this time. 2 adults have fallen ill, including Pastor Mitchell. Nathaniel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Symptoms. Similar to the children, but accelerated. High fever, rash spreading, rapidly disorientation. I've administered your medicine, but the response is slower than with previous cases. The pathogen is adapting, Nathaniel said grimly. Or the contamination has reached a critical concentration. We need to see the patients immediately. Wells nodded. They're in the church, but be aware Wallace is there too, demanding answers. He's not pleased with your absence. Wallace's feelings are the least of my concerns right now, Nathaniel replied. As they hurried toward the church, Eleanor spoke quietly. I'll retrieve James's surveys while you examine the patients. Meet me at the cottage when you can. Nathaniel nodded, watching her disappear down a side street before entering the church with Wells. Inside, the atmosphere had changed dramatically since morning. Where calm and recovery had prevailed, now tension and fear dominated. New patients occupied beds that had been empty, their conditions visibly worse than the original cases. Volunteers moved between them, applying compresses and offering water. At the far end of the room, Judge Wallace stood in conversation with Sheriff Reed and another man Nathaniel didn't recognize, expensively dressed, with the confident bearing of wealth and authority. Dr. Everett, Wallace called, spotting him. How fortunate you have decided to rejoin us. We were beginning to wonder if you'd return to your mountain hermitage. Nathaniel ignored the provocation, moving directly to the nearest new patient, a young woman barely out of girlhood, her skin burning with fever. How long since symptoms appeared? He asked the attendant. About 4 hours, sir. Started with headache and chills, then the fever rose quickly. Nathaniel examined the girl thoroughly, noting the distinctive rash now spreading across her torso rather than beginning at the extremities, as in earlier cases. Her pulse was rapid, breathing shallow. Prepare a stronger dose of the medicine, he instructed Wells. The standard formulation isn't sufficient for this acceleration. As they moved between patients, Wallace approached the well-dressed stranger at his side. Dr. Everett, allow me to introduce Mr. Harrison Silverton, president of the mining company. He's very concerned about the outbreak and has generously offered the company's resources to assist. Nathaniel straightened, meeting Silverton's gaze directly. The man was perhaps 50, with cold eyes that assessed rather than connected. Mr. Silverton, Nathaniel acknowledged, your concern is timely. I've just been examining the environmental factors that may be contributing to this outbreak. Silverton's expression remained pleasant, but something hardened in his eyes. Environmental factors? I was under the impression this was a typical seasonal fever. There's nothing typical about it, Nathaniel countered, and its unusual progression suggests external influences, specifically water contamination from your operation's tailings ponds. Wallace stepped forward, voice low in warning. Everett, this is hardly the place for unfounded accusations. They're not unfounded. I've collected samples showing significant contamination in the watershed. Contamination that's weakening immune responses and allowing this pathogen to take hold more aggressively. Silverton's pleasant mask slipped slightly. You've been trespassing on company property, Doctor. I've been investigating a public health emergency, Nathaniel replied, one that your operations appear to be exacerbating if not causing directly. These are serious allegations, Wallace interjected. Without substantial proof, I have the proof, Nathaniel said. Water and soil samples, patient responses correlating with water consumption patterns, and historical survey data showing the progression of contamination as your mining operation expanded. This last claim was somewhat anticipatory. He hadn't yet seen James Montgomery's surveys, but the reaction it provoked was telling. Silverton and Wallace exchanged a quick glance that confirmed Nathaniel's suspicions. Perhaps we should continue this discussion more privately. Silverton suggested, his tone hardening. My company takes public health very seriously, Doctor. If there are legitimate concerns, we want to address them appropriately. Before Nathaniel could respond, a commotion at the church entrance drew everyone's attention. Sheriff Reed entered, supporting Eleanor, whose face was pale with shock. What happened? Nathaniel moved quickly to her side. The shop, Eleanor managed, her voice unsteady. Someone broke in. The cottage, it's been ransacked. All of James's surveys, his notes, they're gone. Wallace made a show of concern. This is outrageous. Sheriff, organize a search immediately. Mrs. Montgomery is a respected member of our community. But the performance didn't mask the satisfaction Nathaniel glimpsed in Silverton's eyes. They had moved quickly to eliminate evidence that might implicate the mining operation. Are you all right? Nathaniel asked Eleanor quietly. She nodded, composure returning. Nothing was taken except James's research. Nothing else was even disturbed. The implication was clear. This was a targeted theft, not random vandalism or burglary. We need to focus on the immediate crisis, Silverton announced with authority. Dr. Everett, I understand your medicine has been effective. What do you need to produce more? The company will cover all expenses. The offer was transparently self-serving, a way to shift focus from environmental causes to treatment alone. But with patients suffering, Nathaniel couldn't afford to reject any assistance. The medicine requires specific herbs from Silver Ridge, he said, and laboratory conditions for proper preparation. Mrs. Montgomery's shop was equipped for this, but with the break-in, we have a company laboratory at the mine office, Silverton offered smoothly. State-of-the-art equipment, proper ventilation, everything you might need, it's at your disposal. Nathaniel exchanged a glance with Eleanor, reading her thoughts clearly. Accepting would place them under Silverton's control, but refusing would limit their ability to help the growing number of patients. Thank you, Nathaniel said carefully, but I prefer to work in town where I can monitor the patients directly. If you could provide the equipment here. Of course, Silverton agreed, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. Sheriff Reed can escort a company wagon with whatever supplies you need. Just provide a list. As arrangements were made, Nathaniel moved with Eleanor to a quiet corner of the church. They knew exactly what they were looking for, she whispered. Someone must have overheard us talking about James's surveys. Wallace has eyes and ears throughout town, Nathaniel agreed, but they've made a mistake. By targeting the surveys so specifically, they've confirmed their importance and their guilt. But without the evidence, we still have the water samples, and we need to find Emily Watson. Eleanor looked confused. Emily, why? You said she reminded you of Elizabeth. My daughter kept a diary, detailed observations about everything she saw. If Emily is similarly inclined, understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. Children notice everything, and Emily's family lives near the North Creek where the contamination would be most visible. Exactly. If she's been documenting changes in the water wildlife deaths, anything unusual, it might provide the historical context we lost with James's surveys, Eleanor finished. She's been moved here recovering in the children's section. Let's find her. They found Emily awake and much improved, sitting up in bed while reading a book. Her face brightened at the sight of them. Dr. Everett, Miss Nora, did you bring your wolf? She asked eagerly. Nathaniel smiled despite the gravity of the situation. Not today, he's still recovering on the mountain. Emily, I need to ask you something important. The girl nodded solemnly, sensing his seriousness. Do you keep a diary or a notebook, something where you write down things you see around your home? Emily's eyes widened. How did you know Ma says I waste too much paper on silly observations? Those observations might be very important, Eleanor said gently, especially anything you have noticed about the creek near your home. Oh, you mean the magic water? Emily's face lit up. I have a whole book about it. The way it changed colors, and the fish that floated up, and the birds that stopped coming. Nathaniel and Eleanor exchanged a meaningful glance. Where is this book, Emily? Nathaniel asked. Under my bed at home. I hide it there so my brother won't find it and tease me. Would you mind if we borrowed it? It might help us understand why people got sick. Emily considered this seriously. Only if you promise to bring your wolf to visit when I'm better. That's a fair trade. Nathaniel agreed, surprising himself with the commitment. I promise. As they prepared to leave for the Watson home, Wallace approached his expression carefully neutral. Dr. Everett, a moment. Mr. Silverton is most concerned about these allegations regarding water contamination. He suggests you might have been misled by appearances. Mining processes can produce unusual but harmless discoloration in water. I'm familiar with the difference between harmless discoloration and toxic contamination, Judge Wallace. My analysis will confirm which we're dealing with. Wallace's facade of concern hardened slightly. I would hate to see panic spread through town based on preliminary observations. Perhaps it would be best to keep these theories private until definitive proof exists. Like the proof that was stolen from Mrs. Montgomery's cottage, Nathaniel asked pointedly. Wallace didn't flinch. A regrettable crime that Sheriff Reed is investigating diligently. I'm sure there's no connection to our current discussion. I'm sure, Nathaniel echoed, not bothering to hide his skepticism. If you'll excuse us, we have patients to treat. As they left the church, Eleanor spoke quietly. They'll try to stop us from reaching Emily's diary. I know, which is why we need to move quickly before they realize what we're seeking. The Watson home was quiet, Mrs. Watson still at the church with her daughter. Nathaniel and Eleanor entered with the family's prior permission, heading directly to Emily's small bedroom. The diary was exactly where she had described, a leather-bound notebook filled with a child's careful handwriting and colorful drawings. Emily had indeed documented the changes in the creek over the past year in remarkable detail: watercolor shifts, dead fish and frogs, strange foam after rainstorms. She had even pressed flowers and leaves that showed unusual discoloration. This is extraordinary, Eleanor said, turning the pages carefully. She's documented the progression perfectly with dates and specific observations. And she included this. Nathaniel pointed to a carefully folded paper tucked into the back cover, a map of the creek drawn by James Montgomery with his name and survey marks clearly visible. Emily must have found it or been given it by her father, who might have known James. This connects directly to the stolen surveys, Eleanor realized. It proves that contamination has been documented by multiple observers over time. And it proves Wallace and Silverton knew about the problem and did nothing, Nathaniel added. This is the evidence we need. As they secured the diary and prepared to leave, the sound of approaching horses reached them. Through the window, they saw Sheriff Reed and two men in mining company uniforms riding toward the house. They've guessed what we're after, Nathaniel said. We need to leave now. They slipped out the back door just as Reed and his companions reached the front. Moving quickly through gardens and between buildings, they made their way toward the church, where witnesses would make it harder for Reed to confront them directly. We need to present this evidence publicly, Eleanor said as they hurried. Somewhere Wallace and Silverton can't control the narrative. The town meeting tonight, Nathaniel suggested. Wallace called it to address the outbreak. Everyone will be there. Perfect. They won't dare interfere with us in front of the entire town. But as they rounded the corner near the church, they found their path blocked by Silverton and two burly men who were clearly not ordinary miners. Dr. Everett, Mrs. Montgomery. Silverton's voice was pleasant, but his eyes were cold. I believe you have something that belongs to the company. Survey materials, maps, proprietary information protected by contract. Emily Watson's diary belongs to her, not your company, Nathaniel replied. And the evidence it contains of your negligence belongs to the people of Willowbrook. Silverton's facade of civility dropped. I won't allow wild accusations to threaten an enterprise that brings prosperity to this region. Hand over the diary and return to treating your patients. That's what a doctor does, isn't it? Heal the sick, not meddle in matters beyond his expertise. Preventing disease is as much a physician's duty as treating it, Nathaniel countered. Your contamination of the watershed is making these people sick. It stops now. Silverton gestured and his men moved forward threateningly. But before they could act, another voice rang out. That's far enough. Dr. Wells stood in the church doorway, shotgun in hand. Behind him, several townsmen appeared similarly armed. Oh, step away from them, Silverton, Wells ordered. This has gone far enough. Silverton's eyes narrowed. This doesn't concern you, Doctor. The health of this town is very much my concern, as is the truth about what's causing this outbreak. Wells gestured with the shotgun. Now step aside and let them pass. For a tense moment, it seemed Silverton might resist. But calculating the odds, he eventually stepped back, his expression promising future consequences. This isn't over, he said quietly. No, Nathaniel agreed. It's just beginning. Inside the church, Wells quickly explained the situation to the assembled townspeople. The story of the stolen surveys, the break-in at Eleanor's shop, and the attempted intimidation by Silverton spread rapidly through the crowd, transforming confusion into anger. We need to present all the evidence at tonight's town meeting, Wells said. Show everyone exactly what the mining operation has been doing to our water. Eleanor held up Emily's diary. We have the documentation here. Combined with the water samples and our medical observations, it presents a compelling case. Wallace will try to prevent the presentation, Nathaniel warned, or control how it's received. Let him try, said Mr. Barnes, the general store owner. This is our town, not his personal fiefdom. If Silverton's operation is poisoning our children, we deserve to know. As plans were made for the evening meeting, Nathaniel took a moment to check on the newest patients. Their conditions remained serious but had stabilized somewhat with the adjusted medicine. Still, he knew treating symptoms wasn't enough. The source of the contamination had to be addressed. You've started something significant, Eleanor said quietly, joining him beside a sleeping patient. This town has accepted Silverton's influence for years, believing the prosperity was worth whatever price. Now they're seeing the true cost. It wasn't my intention to spark a rebellion, Nathaniel replied. I came to treat the sick, nothing more. Sometimes healing requires addressing the root cause, not just the symptoms. Eleanor smiled slightly, something you and Catherine understood better than most. The mention of his wife brought a familiar pang, but now mixed with something else, a sense that perhaps their work hadn't ended with her death. That through him, through Eleanor, through the evidence they had gathered, something of their shared vision might yet be realized. As evening approached, tension grew throughout Willowbrook. The town hall filled beyond capacity, citizens standing along walls and crowding doorways. Judge Wallace took his position at the front, flanked by Sheriff Reed and Harrison Silverton, whose presence at what should have been a town matter spoke volumes about his influence. Fellow citizens, Wallace began, voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. We face a serious health crisis. I've called this meeting to provide accurate information and prevent panic. Dr. Wells will update us on the outbreak status, after which Mr. Silverton has graciously offered the mining company's resources to assist our recovery. The carefully choreographed agenda was clear control. The narrative minimized concerns about the mining operation, present Silverton as a benefactor rather than a contributor to the problem. But as Wallace continued his introduction, Wells rose from his seat, interrupting the judge mid-sentence. With respect, Your Honor, there's additional information the townspeople need to hear. Information about the cause of this outbreak, not just its treatment. Wallace's expression hardened. We'll address all relevant matters in due course, Doctor. The cause is relevant now, Wells insisted, especially when evidence has been deliberately suppressed and those seeking truth have been threatened. A murmur ran through the crowd. Wallace recognized he was losing control of the meeting. If Dr. Everett or Mrs. Montgomery have concerns, they're welcome to present them after we've addressed the immediate medical situation. The medical situation and its cause are inseparable, Nathaniel said, rising to stand beside Wells, and the people of Willowbrook deserve to know both. Before Wallace could object further, Nathaniel moved to the front of the room, Eleanor joining him with Emily's diary and the water samples. For a moment, looking out at the sea of faces, concerned, hopeful, suspicious, frightened, Nathaniel felt a wave of doubt. He had avoided public speaking, avoided people entirely for a decade. The last time he had addressed a gathering like this was before the Boston Medical Society defending his methods even as Catherine lay dying. Then he felt Eleanor's presence beside him, steady and supportive. And beyond her Wells and others who had come to believe in what they were doing. This wasn't Boston. This wasn't the past. This was Willowbrook now, and these people needed him to speak truth that might save their children. "My name is Dr. Nathaniel Everett," he began, voice finding strength with each word. "For 10 years I've lived on Silver Ridge, separate from your community. But the mountain and valley are connected by air, by water, by the lives that move between them. What affects one affects the other. And right now, something is poisoning both." As Wallace and Silverton watched with barely concealed fury, Nathaniel presented the evidence they had gathered. The water samples with their unnatural coloration. The microscopic examination showing contamination. The correlation between water sources and infection patterns. Then Eleanor stepped forward with Emily Watson's diary, explaining how the child had documented changes in the creek over months, complete with dates, drawings, and pressed specimens showing progressive damage to plant life. And most significantly, Eleanor continued, Emily preserved this map created by my late husband during his surveys 5 years ago. It shows the watershed was already showing signs of contamination then, before the mining expansion, but after the initial operations began. The diary and map passed through the crowd, citizens examining the evidence with growing concern and anger. Wallace attempted to regain control, suggesting the observations were unscientific and anecdotal, but the tide of public opinion had turned decisively. Mr. Barnes stood, his voice cutting through the growing tumult. "Judge Wallace, did you know about this contamination?" Wallace's hesitation was damning. "There have been reports of discoloration, but company engineers assured us it was harmless mineral content, nothing toxic." "You didn't think to investigate further?" another citizen demanded. "Even as our children fell ill." Silverton intervened, his businessman's smoothness now strained. "Willowbrook has prospered from the mining operation. Jobs, tax revenue, infrastructure improvements, all from Silverton mining. Surely these benefits must be weighed against what are still unproven allegations." "Are our children's lives part of that equation, Mr. Silverton?" asked Mrs. Watson, who had risen from her seat, voice trembling with emotion. "Is my Emily's suffering an acceptable cost of your prosperity?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Silverton's expression hardened as he realized the battle for public opinion was lost. Wallace made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "This is a complex matter requiring further study. I propose we form a committee to investigate these claims properly while continuing to address the immediate health crisis." "The time for committees has passed," Nathaniel replied firmly. "The contamination must stop now. The tailings ponds must be properly contained, the discharge into the watershed halted completely." "That would require suspending operations," Silverton objected. "Hundreds would lose their livelihood." "Better temporary unemployment than permanent illness or death," Wells countered. "The mine can reopen when proper safety measures are implemented." The debate continued, growing heated as economic concerns clashed with public health imperatives. But the momentum had clearly shifted. By meeting's end, a resolution had passed demanding immediate cessation of mining operations until independent inspectors could assess the environmental impact and remediation requirements. Wallace and Silverton departed in barely contained fury, already discussing appeals to state authorities and legal challenges. But the townspeople surrounded Nathaniel and Eleanor with gratitude and newfound respect. "You stood up for us when it mattered," Mrs. Watson said, clasping Nathaniel's hand. "The mountain man became our protector, after all." Nathaniel felt uncomfortable with the praise, but Eleanor's approving smile eased his discomfort somewhat. Together they had accomplished what neither could have done, alone revealed the truth, and initiated the changes needed to protect Willowbrook. As they walked back toward the church to check on patients, a light snow began to fall, the first of the season, transforming the town into a quieter, gentler place. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked softly. Nathaniel looked toward Silver Ridge, its peaks disappearing into clouds. "We continue treating the sick, monitor the water sources, ensure Wallace and Silverton follow through with the cleanup. And after that, will you return to your mountain?" The question touched on something Nathaniel had been considering since their confrontation with Silverton. His isolation had been a response to pain, to rejection, but these past days had shown him that engagement, while challenging, offered its own form of healing. "I don't know," he admitted. The mountain is still my home, but perhaps it needn't be my prison. Eleanor's expression softened with understanding. There's a middle path, between complete isolation and full immersion. A way to be part of this community while maintaining the space you need. As they reached the church, Nathaniel paused, looking at this woman who had drawn him back into the world not through force but through respect, through shared purpose and quiet strength. I'd like to find that path, he said, with your help, if you're willing. Eleanor's smile was answer enough as they entered the church together, returning to the work of healing that had brought them together and might yet keep them so. The days following the town meeting unfolded in a delicate balance between progress and tension. Willowbrook itself seemed divided like a patient whose fever had broken, but whose recovery remained uncertain. The mining operation had indeed suspended activities as demanded, but Silverton's influence reached beyond the town. State officials arrived ostensibly to investigate the contamination, though their deference to the mining company president suggested compromised objectivity. Meanwhile, the fever cases stabilized. No new infections appeared after the town switched to water from uncontaminated sources, a spring on the South Ridge, that Nathaniel had identified as safe. Those already ill responded well to the treatment, though recovery was slower for the more severe cases. Nathaniel divided his time between patient care and environmental monitoring, collecting daily water samples to track contamination levels. Eleanor managed the makeshift hospital with quiet efficiency, coordinating volunteers and preparing medicines. They worked as partners, their complementary skills creating a harmony neither had experienced in years. Dr. Wells observed this partnership with knowing eyes. "You two function like a well-designed mechanism," he commented one evening as they reviewed patient charts. "Reminds me of the finest medical teams I saw in Chicago during my residency." Nathaniel made a non-committal sound, uncomfortable with the personal observation, but he couldn't deny the truth in Wells's words. Working with Eleanor felt natural, as if they'd practiced together for years rather than days. The most severely affected patients, including Pastor Mitchell, had been moved to a separate room for intensive care. Nathaniel checked on them regularly, adjusting treatments as needed. On this particular evening, he found Mitchell awake and lucid for the first time in days. "Dr. Everett," the pastor greeted him weakly, "I understand I have you to thank for my continued presence in this world." "Your constitution deserves most of the credit," Nathaniel replied, checking the man's pulse. "Strong for a man of your years." Mitchell smiled faintly. "God's work for me isn't finished yet, I suppose." He studied Nathaniel with surprising clarity. "Nor is yours, doctor. You've found purpose here again, haven't you?" The observation, so direct and insightful, caught Nathaniel off guard. "I'm simply treating the sick. It's what doctors do." "Is it? Then why did you stop for 10 years? Mitchell's tone held no accusation, only gentle curiosity. "What changed?" Nathaniel busied himself with adjusting the pastor's blankets, avoiding the penetrating gaze. "Rest now, your strength is returning, but slowly." "Mrs. Montgomery," Mitchell said undeterred, "she's what changed. She brought you back to yourself." Before Nathaniel could respond, a commotion outside drew his attention. Raised voices, the sound of heavy boots on wooden floors. He moved quickly to the main hall where Eleanor and Wells were confronting Sheriff Reed and two state officials in formal attire. "What's happening?" Nathaniel asked, joining them. Reed looked uncomfortable, avoiding direct eye contact. "These gentlemen are from the State Environmental Commission. They've come about the water testing." The taller official, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetual frown, stepped forward. "Dr. Everett, I'm Commissioner Hargrove. We understand you've been conducting independent testing of water sources and making claims about mining-related contamination." "Not claims, observations, scientifically verified observations," Nathaniel corrected. "Yes, well, that's precisely the issue. The Commission is the only body legally authorized to make such determinations. We'll need all your samples and testing equipment turned over to us immediately." Eleanor moved closer to Nathaniel, her posture protective. "On what authority?" The second official produced a document bearing official seals. State Health Code Section 12, Paragraph 3. During public health emergencies, all testing related to potential contamination must be conducted or supervised by Commission-approved personnel. Wells examined the document with a skeptical eye. "This regulation applies to commercial testing facilities, not physicians responding to immediate medical crises." The interpretation has been reviewed by the state attorney's office. Hargrove replied dismissively. Now the samples, please. Nathaniel recognized the strategy legal maneuvering to control the narrative, suppress independent findings, protect Silverton's interest. He had seen similar tactics in Boston when hospital administrators sought to discredit his research. The samples were collected as part of medical diagnosis and treatment, he said firmly. They fall under physician-patient confidentiality. Hargrove's expression hardened. Doctor obstruction could result in charges. I strongly advise compliance. Reed shifted uncomfortably. They have the authority, Dr. Everett, and Judge Wallace has ordered me to assist them. Of course Wallace was involved. The judge had been conspicuously absent since the town meeting, working behind the scenes rather than facing public scrutiny. Eleanor touched Nathaniel's arm lightly. Give them the samples, she said quietly. We've already documented everything. The townspeople know the truth. She was right, Nathaniel realized. The physical evidence, while important, was secondary to what they had already accomplished, alerting the community, initiating treatment, stopping the immediate contamination. Surrendering the samples was a tactical retreat, not a surrender. Very well, he conceded. The samples are in the laboratory area. I'll retrieve them. As he collected the vials of water and soil, Nathaniel surreptitiously pocketed one critical sample, the original discharge from the mining operation's main pipe, with its distinctive blue-green coloration and chemical properties. The most damning evidence now hidden in his coat. Returning to the main hall, he handed over the remaining samples with professional detachment. I assume you'll be conducting thorough testing and sharing the results with the town. All findings will be reported according to commission protocols. Hargrove replied, not quite meeting Nathaniel's eyes. Which typically means never, Wells muttered as the officials departed with Reed. They can take the samples, Eleanor said, watching through the window as the men loaded their confiscated materials into a wagon. But they can't erase what the town has witnessed. The sick children, the contaminated Creek Emily's documentation. Nathaniel nodded, though concern lingered. Powerful interests like Silverton had many tools at their disposal, legal, financial, political. The battle for Willowbrook's health was far from over. We should check on Emily, he suggested, wanting to focus on something positive. She was asking about Lobo earlier. Eleanor smiled at the mention of the wolf. She's quite fixated on meeting him. You may have to fulfill that promise sooner than you expected. I haven't forgotten, Nathaniel replied, surprised to find he was actually considering bringing the wolf down from the mountain, something that would have seemed unthinkable just days ago. They found Emily sitting up in bed, color returned to her cheeks, reading a book of natural history. Her face brightened when she saw them. Dr. Everett, Miss Nora, is today the day I meet your wolf? Nathaniel couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. Not today, Emily, but soon perhaps. Lobo needs to heal a bit more before he can travel. The girl accepted this with the serious consideration children give to matters involving animals. Is he very wild? Will he let me touch him? He's quite wild, Nathaniel admitted, but he's learning to trust humans again. Rather like me, I suppose. The last words slipped out unintentionally, earning a surprised glance from Eleanor and a guileless nod from Emily. Ma says you were sad for a long time because you lost your family, the child said with disarming directness. Like how I was sad when Pa died in the mine. Nathaniel was momentarily speechless, unprepared for such a frank acknowledgement of his past from a child. Eleanor stepped in smoothly. Sometimes people need time alone when they're sad, Emily. But it's good to come back to friends eventually. Like Dr. Everett did, Emily agreed. And now he's not sad anymore because he has you and everyone in town. The simplicity of the child's assessment, so inaccurate in its details, yet somehow true in its essence, struck Nathaniel deeply. His grief hadn't vanished, would never vanish completely. But it had changed, transformed by recent events and connections into something less consuming, less isolating. How are you feeling today? He asked, redirecting the conversation to safer medical ground. Emily's recovery was progressing well, as were those of most patients. By evening, Nathaniel and Eleanor had discharged 3 children to their homes with instructions for continued care. Others would follow in the coming days. The crisis phase of the outbreak had passed, leaving the slower work of recovery and prevention. As twilight settled over Willowbrook, Nathaniel found himself drawn to the cottage behind Eleanor's shop where he had stayed that first night. James Montgomery's studies still held the atmosphere of scholarly pursuit, though the ransacked shelves showed the violation of Silverton's men. Eleanor found him there examining a geological map of the region that had survived the theft. "Thinking about returning to your cabin?" she asked. Nathaniel traced the outline of Silver Ridge on the map. "I should check on Lobo. He's probably wondering what happened to me." "The wolf survived alone before you found him. He'll manage a few more days." Eleanor moved beside him, studying the map. "Though I understand the pull of the mountain, it's been your sanctuary." "It has," Nathaniel agreed, "though recently it's felt more like a prison," Eleanor suggested gently. He met her gaze, struck again by her perfection. "Perhaps, not one imposed from outside but constructed by my own fears and regrets. Those can be the strongest bars," she said. "I know something about self-imposed isolation even surrounded by people." The admission created a moment of connection between them, an acknowledgement of shared experience despite their different paths. In the quiet of the study with evening shadows gathering, Nathaniel felt an impulse toward openness he had resisted for years. "After Boston," he began haltingly, "after losing Catherine and the children, I couldn't face practicing medicine anymore. Each patient reminded me of my failure to save my own family. Each diagnosis carried the weight of potential error, potential loss." Eleanor listened without interruption, allowing him the space to find words for long-buried feelings. "The mountain offered escape. No expectations, no responsibilities beyond my own survival. I told myself I was continuing our research, maintaining Catherine's legacy, but in truth I was hiding from the pain of human connection." "And now," Eleanor asked softly, before Nathaniel could respond, urgent knocking interrupted. Sheriff Reed stood at the doorway, his expression grave. "Doctor, you're needed at the church. Emily Watson has taken a severe turn. Dr. Wells sent me to find you." The peaceful moment shattered. Nathaniel grabbed his medical bag. "What symptoms?" Fever returned higher than before. Convulsions. The rash has spread to her face and neck. Eleanor was already putting on her coat. "The other recovered patients?" "Just the Watson girl so far," Reed replied as they hurried through the darkening streets. "Wells thinks it might be a relapse rather than a new infection." Nathaniel's mind raced through possibilities. Relapse could indicate the pathogen had developed resistance to their treatment or that the initial recovery had been incomplete, the infection merely dormant rather than eliminated. At the church, they found chaos. Emily thrashed on her bed, her temperature alarmingly high, her breathing rapid and shallow. Wells administered a sedative while volunteers applied cool compresses. "It started suddenly," Wells reported. "One moment she was reading, the next seizing with fever. I've given her a double dose of your medicine, but there's minimal response." Nathaniel examined Emily quickly, noting the unusual progression of symptoms. The rash pattern had changed, becoming more concentrated around her throat and face, rather than spreading evenly as before. Her pulse was erratic, pupils dilated. "This isn't just a relapse," he concluded. "It's different. Almost as if—" He paused, a terrible suspicion forming. "When did she last eat or drink, and what?" Mrs. Watson, hovering nearby with tear-streaked face, answered, "Supper was brought about 2 hours ago. Stew and fresh bread, and a special tea that Judge Wallace sent over. He said it would help her recover strength." Nathaniel and Eleanor exchanged alarmed glances. "Where is this tea?" Nathaniel demanded. "There's still some in the pot," a volunteer offered, indicating a small ceramic teapot on a tray. Nathaniel examined it carefully, detecting a faint chemical odor beneath the herbal scent. "Was Emily the only one who drank this?" "Yes, it was sent specifically for her. The judge said it was a special blend from his personal physician." Eleanor took the teapot, her expression darkening. "This isn't coincidence. Wallace knew Emily's diary was our key evidence. With her testimony discredited by a sudden relapse, it would cast doubt on everything we've presented," Nathaniel finished grimly. "We need to analyze this immediately." In the improvised laboratory, they worked with urgent precision, testing the tea for contaminants. What they found confirmed their worst fears. The drink contained concentrated minerals and chemicals identical to those in the mining discharge, but in a form that would produce rapid, severe symptoms. "They poisoned her," Eleanor whispered, horror and anger mingling in her voice. "Deliberately poisoned a child to protect their interests, and made it appear as a relapse of the fever." Nathaniel added, his own rage building. If she died, they'd claim the outbreak was more virulent than we understood, undermining our entire case. We need to treat her immediately. The standard medicine won't be sufficient for this level of toxicity. Nathaniel nodded, already formulating modifications to their treatment protocol. We'll need activated charcoal to absorb the remaining poison in her system, and a stronger binding agent to neutralize what's already been absorbed. They worked through the night, administering the modified treatment, monitoring Emily's vital signs, adjusting dosages as her condition fluctuated. By dawn, the crisis had passed. Her fever reduced, convulsions stopped, breathing stabilized. But the child remained unconscious, her system severely stressed by the poisoning. As morning light filtered through the church windows, Nathaniel stepped outside for a moment's respite. The air was crisp with approaching winter, the town quiet except for early risers beginning their day. He breathed deeply, trying to clear his mind of the anger and disgust that threatened to overwhelm his clinical judgment. The deliberate poisoning of a child crossed a line he hadn't imagined even Wallace and Silverton would transgress. It demanded response, not just medical, but moral, legal, public. Eleanor joined him, fatigue evident in her face but determination undiminished. She's stable. Wells is watching her. Good. Nathaniel gazed toward the town hall, where Wallace would soon begin his day of official duties, unaware his scheme had been discovered. We need to expose this, Eleanor, immediately and publicly. We will, but we need to be strategic. Wallace and Silverton have already demonstrated they'll destroy evidence and silence witnesses. If we confront them without proper support, they tried to murder a child. Nathaniel cut in, voice tight with controlled fury. Strategy be damned. Eleanor placed a hand on his arm, her touch anchoring him. I share your anger, Nathaniel, but rushing in without a plan could put Emily at further risk. And others. Her rational approach penetrated his rage. Nathaniel took another deep breath, forcing himself to think like the scientist he had once been, rather than the vengeful man he felt himself becoming. You're right, he conceded. We need evidence that can't be dismissed or confiscated, and witnesses beyond ourselves. The tea is our proof, Eleanor said, and we need to document Emily's symptoms, thoroughly establish the connection to the mining contaminants definitively. Wells can help with that, Nathaniel agreed. And Sheriff Reed, he may follow Wallace's orders, but poisoning a child might be beyond what his conscience can bear. As they formulated their plan, a commotion at the edge of town drew their attention. Riders approached, not the state officials or mining company men, but a different group. A woman led them, her bearing dignified, despite travel-worn clothing, her features marking her as Native American. The Lakota delegation, Eleanor explained, seeing Nathaniel's questioning look. They were expected yesterday to discuss water rights affected by the mining operation. Silverton's been trying to prevent the meeting. The timing seemed providential. The Lakota territories downstream would be affected by the same contamination threatening Willowbrook, giving them common cause against Silverton's environmentally destructive practices. Another potential ally, Nathaniel observed. If they're already concerned about water quality, they are. Their representative, Sarah Blackfoot, is highly educated, studied at Carlisle before returning to her people. She understands both worlds and has been fighting mining encroachment for years. This information sparked an idea in Nathaniel's mind. Can you arrange a meeting privately before Wallace or Silverton realize they've arrived? Eleanor nodded. Pastor Mitchell has supported their land claims. They trust him. I'll speak with Ms. Blackfoot when they reach town. While Eleanor departed to make arrangements, Nathaniel returned to Emily's bedside. The girl remained unconscious but stable, her breathing regular color slowly returning to her face. Mrs. Watson sat nearby, exhaustion and worry etched in her features. She's improving, Nathaniel assured her. The worst is past. What happened, doctor? She was recovering so well. Nathaniel considered how much to reveal. Mrs. Watson deserved the truth, but learning her daughter had been deliberately poisoned would be devastating. There was a toxic substance in the tea, he said carefully, something that reacted badly with her weakened system. Mrs. Watson's expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension. The special tea from Judge Wallace. Her hands trembled. He did this to my Emily. We're investigating, Nathaniel replied, neither confirming nor denying. For now, Emily needs rest and careful monitoring, and nothing to eat or drink that hasn't been prepared by myself, Mrs. Montgomery, or Dr. Wells. The mother nodded, a new hardness entering her gaze. I understand, doctor, and when Emily wakes, she'll understand too. The implication was clear. Another witness against Wallace and Silverton, one whose testimony as a mother would carry powerful emotional weight. By midday, Eleanor had arranged the meeting with Sarah Blackfoot and two Lakota elders. They gathered in James Montgomery's study, the most private location available, with Dr. Wells joining them to provide medical corroboration. Sarah Blackfoot was perhaps 40, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a calm demeanor that commanded respect. She listened without interruption as Nathaniel and Eleanor presented their findings: the water contamination, the fever outbreak, the deliberate poisoning of Emily Watson, and the official efforts to suppress evidence. "Your experience mirrors our own," she said when they finished. "Our people have reported sick livestock, contaminated fishing grounds, children with unexplained rashes, and breathing difficulties. The company denies any connection, and state officials ignore our complaints." One of the elders, a man whose weathered face spoke of decades of wisdom, added, "The water carries the poison to all who depend on it, regardless of boundaries drawn on paper maps. Your suffering is our suffering. We believe a united front would be more effective than separate challenges," Eleanor suggested. "Your legal standing as a sovereign nation, combined with our medical evidence, could force official action beyond what Silverton can control." Sarah finished nodding. "I agree, but Judge Wallace controls the local legal system and Silverton has influence with state authorities. We need to appeal to federal jurisdiction." "On what grounds?" Nathaniel asked. "Treaty violations," Sarah replied. "The 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty guarantees unpolluted water sources for the Lakota Nation. Mining contamination that crosses into our territory constitutes a federal offense. This approach offered a path forward that circumvented Wallace's local authority and Silverton's state connections. But it would take time during which Emily and others remained vulnerable. We need immediate protection as well," Nathaniel pointed out. "Wallace has already demonstrated willingness to take extreme measures." "My people can help with that," the elder offered. "We have warriors who can watch over the child and others without being detected. And we have our own healers who understand poisons." The alliance forming in that small study represented everything Wallace and Silverton feared: knowledge, legal standing, moral authority, and public sympathy combining against their economic interests. But implementing their plan would require careful timing and coordination. As the meeting concluded, Wells pulled Nathaniel aside. "Wallace has called another town meeting for this evening, ostensibly to update the community on recovery efforts. But I suspect he's planning to reassert control over the narrative." "Perfect," Nathaniel replied. "A public forum is exactly what we need." The remainder of the day passed in careful preparation. Wells documented Emily's poisoning in meticulous detail, creating a medical record that would stand up to scrutiny. Eleanor worked with Sarah Blackfoot to draft formal complaints, citing specific treaty violations. And Nathaniel prepared the most damning evidence: comprehensive analysis of the poison tea matched against the original mining discharge sample he had secretly retained. As evening approached, Nathaniel found himself drawn once more to Emily's bedside. The child had regained consciousness briefly but remained weak and confused. Her small hand felt fragile in his larger one as he checked her pulse. "You're going to be fine, Emily," he told her softly. "I promise." Her eyes flickered open, focusing on him with effort. "Dear Everett, did I see your wolf yet?" The innocent question amid such dire circumstances nearly undid Nathaniel's composure. "Not yet, but soon. He's waiting for you to get stronger." "Tell him I'm trying," she whispered before drifting back to sleep. Nathaniel felt Eleanor's presence before he saw her, a warmth and steadiness that had become familiar in these intense days together. "It's time," she said quietly. "The town hall is filling up." Together they walked through Willowbrook's darkening streets toward what both knew would be a confrontation rather than a meeting. The town hall blazed with lamplight voices spilling from its open doors as citizens gathered. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with tension. Wallace stood at the front with Silverton and the state officials, their expressions suggesting confidence in their control of the proceedings. That confidence visibly faltered when Nathaniel and Eleanor entered, followed by Sarah Blackfoot and the Lakota elders in their formal attire. The unexpected alliance clearly hadn't been part of Wallace's calculations. "Dr. Everett," Wallace acknowledged stiffly. "Mrs. Montgomery, I wasn't aware you'd invited guests to our town meeting." The Lakota delegation was already scheduled to meet with town officials regarding water rights, Eleanor replied smoothly. Given the current health crisis and its connection to water quality, their presence seemed appropriate. Wallace's jaw tightened, but protocol demanded courtesy to the native delegation, at least publicly. Of course. Welcome to Willowbrook. Now, if we could proceed with our agenda. A moment, Judge Wallace, Nathaniel interrupted, moving to the center of the room. Before your prepared statement there's an urgent matter the town should know about. Dr. Everett, we have a structured agenda. Emily Watson was poisoned last night, Nathaniel announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Poisoned by a special tea sent specifically to her. A tea containing concentrated versions of the same toxins found in the mining operations discharge. The room erupted in shocked murmurs and exclamations. Mrs. Watson stood, her voice trembling but clear. The tea came with a note from Judge Wallace, said it would help my daughter recover. All eyes turned to Wallace, whose face had drained of color. This is absurd. I sent no tea. This is clearly an attempt to divert attention from the fact that your treatment failed, doctor. The child relapsed, nothing more. Then you won't object to this, Nathaniel replied, producing a document from his coat. A formal request for federal investigation into treaty violations and attempted murder of a child witness, addressed to the U.S. Marshal's Office in the Department of Interior. Silverton stepped forward, abandoning pretense of disinterest. This meeting is over. These accusations are libelous and will be addressed through proper legal channels. Like the proper channels that confiscated our water samples, Eleanor challenged. Or the proper channels that broke into my shop and stole research documents. Sarah Blackfoot moved to stand beside Nathaniel and Eleanor, her presence adding gravity to the confrontation. The Lakota Nation has documented systematic pollution of treaty-protected waterways by Silverton Mining Company. We have petitioned for federal intervention on grounds of treaty violation and public health emergency. The Unified Front medical evidence, eyewitness testimony, legal standing, and moral authority created a momentum Wallace and Silverton hadn't anticipated. As the townspeople processed these revelations, their expressions shifted from confusion to anger. Mr. Barnes stood, addressing Wallace directly. Judge, did you send that tea to the Watson girl? Wallace's hesitation was damning. I may have had my housekeeper prepare a traditional remedy, but if it contained anything harmful, I had no knowledge of it. A traditional remedy sent only to the child whose diary provided key evidence against the mining operation, Wells observed pointedly. Quite a coincidence. The meeting dissolved into chaos as accusations flew and factions formed. Most townspeople gathered around Nathaniel, Eleanor, and the Lakota delegation, while a smaller group, those with direct economic ties to the mining operation, stood with Wallace and Silverton. In the midst of the tumult, Sheriff Reed pushed through the crowd, his expression troubled. He approached Wallace, speaking just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Judge, there's a telegram from the federal marshal's office. They're sending representatives to investigate water contamination and possible treaty violations. They'll arrive tomorrow. Wallace's facade cracked entirely. He turned on Silverton with barely contained fury. You assured me this would be handled locally, that your state contacts would prevent federal involvement. Lower your voice, Silverton hissed, but the damage was done. Their collusion was now publicly exposed. As the implications rippled through the assembly, Nathaniel felt a strange sense of completion. The truth was emerging, justice beginning its slow process. The children of Willowbrook would be protected, the water sources restored to purity. But mixed with this satisfaction was awareness that his role in town was changing. He had emerged from isolation, become part of this community's struggle in ways he hadn't anticipated. The mountain cabin that had been his refuge now seemed distant, belonging to a different version of himself. Eleanor touched his arm lightly, drawing him back to the present moment. We should return to Emily. With Wallace exposed, she may be in greater danger, not less. She was right, of course. Victory in the town hall didn't ensure safety, not with desperate men fighting to protect their interests. Together, they slipped away from the continuing confrontation, making their way back to the church, where Emily and other patients remained under care. They found the church quiet but not unguarded. Two Lakota men sat unobtrusively near the entrance, their presence a subtle but effective deterrent against any who might wish harm to those inside. Inside, Emily slept peacefully, her condition improved from earlier in the day. The meeting went as expected, Wells asked, joining them. Better, Eleanor replied. Federal investigators arrive tomorrow. Wallace and Silverton's alliance is publicly exposed, and most of the town has turned against them. Good, though I suspect they won't surrender their influence without further struggle. Nathaniel nodded agreement. We should maintain vigilance until the federal authorities take control of the situation. As if summoned by his caution, a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the windows, they saw an orange glow illuminating the night sky fire coming from the direction of Eleanor's shop. No, she gasped, already moving toward the door. Nathaniel caught her arm. Wait, it could be a diversion to draw us away from Emily and the other patients. Wells volunteered immediately. I'll go assess the situation. You two stay here. But before Wells could leave, Sheriff Reed burst in, breathing hard from running. Lieutenant Everett is Montgomery Wallace has ordered your arrest for public endangerment and practicing medicine without proper state authorization. Silverton's men are coming to seize all your medical supplies and documentation, and they have set fire to the apothecary shop to destroy remaining evidence. Under what authority? Nathaniel demanded. Federal jurisdiction supersedes local and treaty matters. Wallace doesn't care about authority anymore, Reed replied grimly. He's desperate. The fire is just the beginning. You need to leave town immediately, both of you. Eleanor's face paled at the news of her shop burning, but her voice remained steady. We can't abandon the patients or the evidence we've gathered. My deputies will protect the patients, Reed assured her, and I've already secured copies of your documentation to provide to the federal investigators. But you two are in immediate danger. The severity of their situation became clear as shouts and approaching torchlight appeared outside the church. A mob led by Wallace and Silverton's supporters was advancing their intentions unmistakably hostile. The mountain, Nathaniel decided quickly. My cabin. We can reach it by the eastern trail and hold out there until federal authorities arrive. Reed nodded approval. I'll create a diversion to cover your departure. Take the back path through the cemetery. Horses are waiting at the old mill. As the sheriff hurried out, Nathaniel gathered their most essential supplies and documentation. Eleanor moved to Emily's bedside for a quick farewell. Dr. Wells will take care of you, she told the drowsy child. We'll return soon. With the wolf, Emily asked, managing a small smile. With the wolf, Eleanor promised. The escape through Willowbrook's darkened streets felt surreal to Nathaniel, a man who had avoided human contact for a decade now, fleeing human pursuers, responsible not only for his own safety, but for Eleanor's as well. They moved swiftly but cautiously, using shadows and knowledge of the town's layout to avoid detection. Behind them, the glow of Eleanor's burning shop illuminated the night sky, a stark reminder of the depths to which Wallace and Silverton would sink to protect their interests. Ahead lay the mountain Nathaniel's refuge, soon to be their shared sanctuary. The horses Reed had arranged were indeed waiting saddled and ready at the abandoned mill. Within minutes, they were galloping toward the eastern trail that wound up Silver Ridge. The path was treacherous in darkness, but Nathaniel knew every turn, every hazard. Eleanor followed his lead with the confidence of an experienced rider maintaining pace despite the difficult terrain. Only when they were well up the mountainside did they pause to rest the horses and look back at Willowbrook below. From this distance, the town appeared peaceful, the scattered lights giving no indication of the conflict unfolding within. Your home, Eleanor said softly. Your shop, I'm sorry. Buildings can be rebuilt, she replied, though pain edged her voice. Lives cannot be replaced. Emily and the others are what matter now. Her resilience touched Nathaniel deeply. This woman had lost so much husband, so now her livelihood yet remained focused on others' welfare rather than her own losses. They continued upward as the night deepened, the mountain air growing colder with elevation. When they finally reached Nathaniel's cabin, both were exhausted from the journey and the emotional intensity of the day's events. Lobo greeted them at the door, his initial wariness of Eleanor quickly replaced by cautious acceptance as he sensed Nathaniel's trust in her. The wolf's leg had healed remarkably well. He moved with only slight favoring of the formerly injured limb. He remembers you, Nathaniel observed as Lobo allowed Eleanor to stroke his thick fur. From your previous visit. Animals sense intentions better than humans sometimes, she replied. They know who means harm and who doesn't. The cabin felt different with Eleanor's presence, smaller in physical dimension, but somehow larger in possibility. Nathaniel built up the fire while she arranged their supplies and documents, creating order from the chaos of their hasty departure. We should be safe here until the federal investigators arrive. Nathaniel said, finally allowing himself to relax slightly. The trail is difficult to follow even in daylight for those unfamiliar with the mountain. And if they do find us, there are caves further up where we can hide if necessary. Places only I know. Eleanor nodded, accepting his assurance. They settled into an uneasy vigilance, taking turns watching through the night while the other rested. Lobo joined the rotation, his keen senses more alert than either humans to approaching danger. Dawn broke clear and cold over Silver Ridge, revealing a world transformed by overnight frost. The trees sparkled in early sunlight, their branches outlined in crystalline white. Under different circumstances, the beauty might have been uplifting. Now it merely emphasized their isolation and vulnerability. "What happens after this?" Eleanor asked as they shared a simple breakfast. "When the federal authorities have completed their investigation and Silverton's operations are either closed or reformed." The question touched on thoughts Nathaniel had been avoiding, the future beyond this immediate crisis. His life on the mountain had been predictable, controlled, safe in its isolation. Recent events had shattered that controlled existence, forcing him back into human connection and conflict. "I don't know," he admitted. "My place has been here for so long. But now you've remembered what it means to be part of something larger," Eleanor finished for him, "to use your gifts where they're needed most." Before Nathaniel could respond, Lobo suddenly tensed, ears forward, attention focused on the trail leading to the cabin. A moment later, they heard it too, approaching horses, multiple riders moving with purpose rather than caution. "Wallace's men," Nathaniel said grimly, reaching for his rifle. "They must have found someone who knows the mountain trails." Eleanor gathered their documentation with practiced efficiency. "The caves you mentioned. No time, they're too close." Nathaniel moved to the window, assessing their options. "We'll have to stand our ground." As the riders came into view, however, Nathaniel lowered his rifle in surprise. Leading the group was Sheriff Reed, accompanied not by Wallace's supporters, but by two men wearing the distinctive badges of U.S. Marshals. "Dr. Everett," Reed called as they approached. "Mrs. Montgomery, it's safe to come out. These are Marshals Davis and Whitaker from the federal office." Cautiously, Nathaniel opened the door, Lobo at his side. The wolf's presence gave the approaching men pause, but they dismounted and approached with professional courtesy. "Dr. Nathaniel Everett," the older marshal asked. "I'm Chief Marshal Davis. We have some questions about water contamination and its connection to illness in Willowbrook." "You arrived sooner than expected," Nathaniel observed. "We were already en route when we received the Lakota Nation's formal complaint," Davis explained. "The situation escalated considerably overnight. Judge Wallace attempted to organize what amounted to a lynch mob against you and Mrs. Montgomery." Reed continued the explanation. "When that failed, he and Silverton tried to flee town with company documents. They're currently in custody for interfering with a federal investigation, destruction of evidence, and Penny, your testimony, attempted murder in the poisoning of Emily Watson." The news was better than they could have hoped. Not only had federal authorities intervened, but Wallace and Silverton were already facing consequences for their actions. "The patients, Eleanor asked urgently. "Emily and the others. All stable and improving," Reed assured her. "Dr. Wells has continued the treatments you established, and the Lakota healers have contributed their knowledge as well." Marshal Davis stepped forward. "We need your formal statements and evidence to proceed with charges against Wallace, Silverton, and the mining company. And there's considerable interest in your medical approach to treating the contamination victims. The Federal Health Service has expressed desire to consult with you both. The validation of their work, the protection of federal authority, the prospect of justice for Willowbrook, all represented outcomes Nathaniel had scarcely dared hope for when he first descended from his mountain to help treat the fever outbreak. "We'll provide whatever information and assistance is needed," he said, speaking for both of them with a glance at Eleanor, who nodded agreement. As they prepared to return to Willowbrook, Nathaniel found himself reluctant to leave the cabin that had been his sanctuary for so long. Not from fear or avoidance now, but from awareness that his relationship with this place and with the world beyond had fundamentally changed. The mountain would always be part of him, but it could no longer be his entire world. Eleanor seemed to sense his thoughts. "The cabin will remain," she said quietly. "A retreat when needed, not an exile." Her understanding, so precise and compassionate, reminded Nathaniel again of how thoroughly she had come to know him in these intense days together. and how much he had come to rely on her perspective, her strength, her presence. "There's a child waiting to meet a wolf," he said, finally looking at Lobo, who watched them with intelligent eyes. "I made a promise." Eleanor smiled. "So you did. Do you think he'll come with us?" "I think he's curious enough about this valley that's caused so much disruption to his routine." Nathaniel whistled softly, a signal he had established with the wolf. "What do you say, Lobo, ready to meet Emily?" The wolf tilted his head, considering the question, with what seemed like genuine comprehension. Then decisively he moved to stand by the door, looking back at them expectantly. "I believe that's a yes," Nathaniel observed, feeling an unexpected lightness in his spirit. Their return to Willowbrook created a very different sensation than their hasty departure. Citizens greeted them with respect and relief, the federal presence having shifted the town's power dynamics overnight. Where Wallace's influence had once dominated, now cooperation with the investigation was the prevailing attitude. At the church, they found Emily much improved, sitting up in bed and working on a new drawing in her diary. Her face brightened at their appearance, then transformed to pure wonder as Lobo padded in behind them. "Your wolf," she breathed, eyes wide. "You really brought him? I promised, didn't I?" Nathaniel said, guiding Lobo gently toward the bed. "Emily, this is Lobo. Lobo, meet Emily." The wolf approached cautiously, sniffing the air, assessing this small human with intelligent consideration. Emily remained perfectly still, allowing Lobo to investigate at his own pace. When he finally moved close enough for her to touch, she extended a tentative hand, letting him sniff her fingers before gently stroking his head. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "Does he live with you on the mountain?" "For now," Nathaniel replied, "until his leg is fully healed and he decides whether to return to the wild or stay." "Like you," Emily said with a child's direct insight, "you came down from the mountain to heal, and now you have to decide too." The parallel so innocently expressed crystallized the choice Nathaniel had been contemplating. His path forward wasn't about geography, mountain versus valley, but about engagement versus isolation, fear versus purpose. Over the following days, the federal investigation proceeded with thoroughness and authority Wallace had never anticipated. The mining operation was shut down, pending complete environmental assessment and remediation. The contaminated watershed was quarantined, alternative water sources established, and a comprehensive health screening implemented for all Willowbrook residents. Nathaniel and Eleanor worked closely with federal health officials, sharing their treatment protocols and research. Their approach to the fever, combining traditional medicine with botanical compounds and innovative delivery methods, earned recognition that might lead to wider adoption in similar cases. The burned apothecary shop presented an opportunity rather than a setback. With federal compensation for damages and community support, Eleanor planned a larger facility that would serve as both pharmacy and clinic, integrating her knowledge with Nathaniel's medical expertise. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the temporary home the town had provided, watching the sunset paint Silver Ridge in golden light, Eleanor asked the question that had hovered between them since their return. "Will you stay, Nathaniel? Not just for the crisis, but beyond." He considered the mountain, his cabin visible as a distant speck among the trees. Then he looked at Willowbrook, at the community that had transformed from suspicious strangers to patients' allies, friends. "Catherine always said a doctor's place is where healing is needed," he said finally. "I forgot that for a long time. You helped me remember." Eleanor's expression softened. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was. She would have liked you." Nathaniel found the comparison natural rather than painful, a connection between past and present rather than a reopening of wounds. "I'll stay," he continued, "not just in Willowbrook, but in the world. The mountain will remain part of me, a place of reflection and research. But my work, our work, is here among people." Eleanor's hand found his, the touch conveying understanding beyond words. "And Lobo," Nathaniel smiled, thinking of the wolf who had become an unlikely bridge between his isolated past and connected future. Emily had made Lobo something of a local celebrity, her stories and drawings creating a more sympathetic image of the mountain wolf among townspeople. "Lobo will make his own choice, I think, but he seems to be developing a fondness for certain aspects of town life, particularly the treats Emily smuggled to him during his regular visits." As darkness fell over Willowbrook, lights appeared in windows throughout the town as signs of life continuing, healing, renewing. On Silver Ridge, Nathaniel's cabin stood dark, but not abandoned, a refuge, rather than an exile, a chapter in his life rather than its conclusion. The valley had called him back from isolation, offered purpose, where he had known only regret. And in answering that call, he had found not just professional redemption, but personal renewal, echoes from the valley that awakened echoes from his heart. Beside him, Eleanor's presence promised partnership in the work ahead, treating the sick, protecting the vulnerable, standing against forces that valued profit above people. Together, they represented something Wallace and Silverton had failed to understand: that true healing required addressing causes as well as symptoms, communities as well as individuals. "It won't be easy," Nathaniel acknowledged. "There will be other Wallaces, other Silvertons, and other Emilys," Eleanor countered, "other chances to make a difference." As if in agreement, a wolf's howl sounded from the direction of the mountain lobo, perhaps calling to his wild kin or simply announcing his presence in the world. The sound carried across the valley, neither mournful nor threatening, but alive with possibility. Like the mountain man who had found his way back to humanity and the valley that had welcomed him home.